Here at the Hidden Treasury, we strive to share ancient wisdom with modern minds. If you enjoy discovering timeless insights that impact our world today, then you should subscribe and hit the bell to never miss an episode. Now, let's take a look at the red button thought experiment. Picture this. You have a red button in front of you. Pressing it would instantly and painlessly end human history. No suffering, no lingering effects, just a complete and utter end. Would you be willing to do it? Pressing the red button starts the thought experiment, which is both simple and profound. It asks us to consider if the existence of humans causes more harm than good, the nature of suffering, and the moral weight of our choices. The thought experiment starts with the premise that humans are fundamentally flawed, and it continues with the inescapability of war, environmental destruction, and suffering throughout our history and present. Would our species be better off without humans? Or would the world be a better place if we didn't exist? The red button represents a drastic solution, a permanent end to human suffering. This thought experiment isn't about making hasty decisions, but rather about contemplating the intricacies of human life. First, it makes us question whether or not life is worth living, regardless of the pain it causes. Some contend that life, despite all its. In order to grapple with the red button, one must also examine the nature of suffering. Some philosophers, such as Arthur Schopenhauer, have contended that life is essentially a cycle of desire and dissatisfaction, wherein brief moments of happiness are triumphed over by pain. On the other hand, there are many who believe that life's positive aspects, its beauty, love, creativity, and growth, are outweighed by the endless suffering that countless individuals, human and otherwise, experience. Looking at it this way, pressing the red button might seem like a compassionate way to end the endless cycle of suffering. But for some, suffering is an essential component of being human. It's the driving force behind everything we experience. Without suffering, how could we possibly value happiness, love, and success? Another level of this thought experiment considers the ethical implications of this decision for all of humanity. Even if one believes that doing so would end suffering, does anyone have the right to make that choice? The red button simplifies the diversity of human experience by assuming that one perspective can encompass the experiences of all. However, despite our imperfections, humanity has demonstrated incredible resilience and the ability to change. This has been demonstrated through scientific breakthroughs, social progress, and acts of kindness. On the other hand, some people endure profound suffering while others find immense value and fulfillment in their lives. While we face current hardships, it is important to remember that our actions have a profound impact on the planet. Humans have driven species to extinction, polluted ecosystems, and altered the global climate, among other problems. Pressing the button would erase both the suffering and the potential of humanity. Can we ever justify ending the possibility of a brighter future? The thought experiment also prompts us to reflect on our own prejudices and emotions. For some, the desire to press the button may originate from personal despair or frustration with humanity's shortcomings. For others, the choice to abstain may be motivated by a desire to maintain a healthy environment. Yet, this begs the question, does Earth actually have intrinsic value apart from human perception? Who will be around to see or appreciate the Earth's restoration after we're all gone? And does it really matter? Based on our natural tendency to avoid harm, even in a hypothetical situation, the red button poses a dilemma that forces us to examine our motives and principles. Adding an intriguing twist to the experiment, there's a chance that the red button is just an illusion, a test meant not to be pressed. In this view, the button poses a challenge to humanity's self-awareness and ethical reasoning. By not pressing it, we demonstrate our belief in the value of. In the end, the red button thought experiment isn't so much about the act of pressing or not pressing the button as it is about the questions it poses. It forces us to face the intricate web of existence, where joy and sorrow, destruction and creation, despair, and hope are all interconnected. It challenges us to ponder the essence of life, the ethics of choice, and our position in the universe. Universe. The thought experiment doesn't give us the easy answers we need, but it is supposed to prompt us to reflect and examine our values and assumptions. In the end, we don't press the red button because the decision isn't clear, but because the power of the question is, through this investigation, we gain a better understanding of who we are, how we fit in with humanity, and how life-shaping our choices are. The most controversial philosophical statements ever made by Plato in his 1882 work The Gay Science were, "God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him." Plato wasn't making a literal proclamation, but rather a dire warning about the fall of the belief systems that had governed Western civilization for centuries. At its core, this idea reflects the impact of the Enlightenment, science, and secularization, which led to a replacement of faith in God with faith in reason and progress, freeing humanity from religious dogma. But I saw this as a double-edged sword. Without religion's moral framework, humanity would be left to wander aimlessly in a world devoid of absolute values and meaning. To illustrate this existential crisis, he used the parable of the madman. In it, a man storms into a marketplace, proclaiming that God has died and that we are his murderers. The crowd laughs, not understanding the gravity of his words. The madman laments, "What did we do when we freed this earth from its sun? Are we not constantly plunging into abyss? Is there any hope for the future?" God is essential to human flourishing. Without him, we run the danger of succumbing to nihilism, the conviction that our lives have no purpose. The repugnant conclusion is a disturbing paradox that philosopher Derek Parfit introduced in his book Reasons and Persons. It questions our most fundamental assumptions about what it means to live a happy life in a smaller world. Consider a society where a small number of people lead exceptionally good lives. Now think about adding more people to that society, each leading a less fulfilling but still worthwhile life. As the population grows, we are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about our happiness, population, and ethics. This repugnant conclusion arises from a particular line of reasoning in utilitarian population ethics, which aims to maximize total happiness. A world where billions of people live lives of minimal happiness, and yet this world is considered morally better because the total happiness exceeds the lower quality of individual lives, is a deeply counterintuitive and absurd conclusion. As a result, the average quality of life decreases, but the total amount of happiness increases because more people are experiencing positive lives. If this logic is carried to its extreme, we end up with a world like this. It's troubling that the repugnant conclusion reduces lives to numbers by focusing on the total sum of happiness. This abstraction ignores the uniqueness of each person and their rich, complex experiences, which is a shame because under this framework, people can lead meaningful and fulfilling lives. However, under a strict utilitarian framework, total happiness takes precedence. The complexity and variety of human experience begs the question, is it possible to quantify happiness in such a simplistic manner? How can the satisfaction of a richly satisfying life be compared to the superficial contentment of many lives that are scarcely worth living? Philosophers have provided a range of responses to this repugnant conclusion. Some contend that utilitarianism is flawed because it ignores other values, such as fairness, dignity, and the significance of individual. The average utility principle, put forth by thinkers like Parfit, advocates for a society's average level of happiness rather than its total amount. According to this principle, a smaller population with a higher average level of happiness is preferable than a larger population with a lower average level of happiness. This nuanced framework seeks to strike a balance between the quantity and quality of happiness. Another response to the repugnant conclusion is to question the moral value of adding new people to the world. Some philosophers argue that morality should focus on improving the lives of existing individuals rather than creating new ones. This perspective challenges the idea that artificially raising the average happiness through population reduction is a good idea. However, this approach does come with its own set of problems. The assumption that adding more people to the world automatically makes it better implies that the most important thing is not the number of happy people, but the quality of life for the ones already here. This disgusting conclusion has real-world consequences for decisions regarding population and resources. For instance, in debates over global development, policymakers frequently have to choose between meeting the basic needs of more people and improving the quality of life for a smaller group of people. Population growth, according to the repugnant conclusion's reasoning, should take precedence over quality of life, regardless of the consequences. This leads to moral dilemmas regarding the proper way to divide up the benefits of future generations from those of the present. The work of Parf on the repugnant conclusion has impacted numerous philosophical discussions, including those concerning the ethics of reproduction and the moral obligations of nations and international organizations. It forces us to examine our own values in a critical light. At its core, the repugnant conclusion is more than just a paradox. It reflects the inconsistencies in our moral thinking and forces us to confront the tension between our own selfish desires and the needs of the collective. We must also ask ourselves whether happiness is an objective measure of a good life or if it is oversimplified and fails to capture the complexities of the human experience. Considering our gut feelings and the consequences of our ethical theories, by delving into this paradox, we can better grasp the difficulties and constraints of moral philosophy. It serves as a reminder that the quest for a better society frequently leads to more questions than answers. Albert Camus likens this never-ending cycle to the story of Copus, a man doomed to roll a boulder up a hill, asking, "What's the point?" It's a never-ending cycle of falling down. But in his essay about the myth of Copus, Camus examines the human condition and asks, is life worth living if there is no inherent meaning in it? Isn't existence absurd? The absurdity stems from the conflict between our desire for purpose and the universe's indifference. But instead of despair, Camus finds liberation in the struggle itself, which, as he writes, fills a man's heart. It seems like there's no way out of this jam, but Camus takes back his story by embracing the absurd and realizing how pointless his task is. In his rebellion, Copus finds freedom from his punishment and realizes that life isn't about despair, but about living fully, even in the face of life's absurdity. He rejects nihilism and false hope, insisting that the lack of meaning in life actually makes each moment more valuable. Existential nihilism is a philosophy that challenges our comforting illusions and asks us to confront the harsh reality that life has no inherent meaning. The universe doesn't care about us, and that everything we strive for, success, love, knowledge, ultimately dissolves into nothingness. Unlike Copus, we choose to create meaning in our lives, although we do face endless cycles. To many, facing reality as it is like peering into a black hole, where all sense of purpose and value crumbles under the weight of apathy. Existential nihilism rose to prominence in the writings of 19th-century philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche, Søren Kierkegaard, and Fyodor Dostoevsky. Nietzsche saw the fall of traditional moral and religious institutions as a watershed moment for humanity when God died. The existential nihilist posits that, in the absence of a divine plan or higher authority, humanity is left to navigate an empty universe without ultimate meaning or direction. This lack of inherent meaning extends to every aspect of life, from the work we do to the relationships we form and the goals we pursue. For them, this is not a sign of pessimism or despair, but rather the reality of the universe lies by its own set of rules, and any significance we ascribe to it is entirely a product of our own imagination. Existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, who is often linked to nihilistic views, provided an alternative viewpoint on this emptiness, arguing that life's inherent lack of meaning is not an issue that needs fixing, but rather a reality that must be accepted. Sartre believed that humans are doomed to be free, and that without a predetermined goal, it is our ultimate responsibility to create our own values and meaning. This freedom, although thrilling, is also profoundly unsettling because it puts the burden of defining our lives squarely on our shoulders without an external guide. For many, this leaves them feeling despondent, as if there is no point in living at all if there is no objective meaning to life. This question has plagued humanity for centuries, leading to what is commonly referred to as the existential crisis, a profound confrontation with the emptiness of existence. However, not everyone struggles with this concept. There are many who find solace in nihilism's rejection of imposed meanings, which allows them to live authentically and free from societal expectations and the need to conform. However, this freedom is not without its challenges. Without a universal framework, how can we discern what is good or bad, worthwhile or wasteful? Nihilism doesn't offer clear answers. It doesn't tell us how to live or what to value. Instead, it forces us to. Many critics of existential nihilism claim that it is too bleak and even destructive, arguing that a worldview devoid of meaning can lead to apathy, selfishness, or moral chaos. However, many philosophers and artists have utilized nihilism as a springboard for deep creativity and insight. Some find that it helps them appreciate life's fleeting moments, like a sunset, a shared laugh, or a peaceful walk, more fully because they are unbound by cosmic significance. Fyodor Dostoevsky's novel The Brothers Karamazov delves into the moral implications of a world devoid of God, posing the question of whether humanity can uphold morality in the absence of divine authority. Albert Camus, who was not exclusively a nihilist, tackled similar themes in his concept of the absurd. In this work, he famously pondered the value of life in light of this absurdity. But instead of giving up, he embraced its contradictions, as seen in works such as The Myth of. According to his argument, we should picture Copus relegated to a life of meaningless boulder rolling up a hill. Living despite this lack of purpose becomes a rebellion against existential nihilism, which strips away illusions and forces us to face the stark reality of life. This reality can be paralyzing for some, but for others, it offers solace and a promise of a better future. Others, it is a rallying cry to create, to act, and to live life to the fullest despite the inevitable transience of all things. In the end, existential nihilism presents us with a paradox. By rejecting the existence of any ultimate meaning, it compels us to acknowledge the tremendous agency we possess in molding our own lives. The lack of a cosmic purpose does not diminish the worth of being alive, but rather directs our attention to the present moment, to the decisions we make and the connections we forge. This is in equal measure a burden and a gift, a reminder that although the universe may be apathetic, our lives are entirely within our control. To put it simply, cosmic horror is an existential dread that stems from our insignificance in a universe that doesn't know or care about us. As Lovecraft so eloquently put it, the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. This isn't a fear of monsters, but rather of the vast, cold, and unknowable universe. As a result of coming to terms with the fact that our familiar reality is suspended in a vast expanse controlled by forces that defy our ability to comprehend, cosmic horror flourishes. If the cosmos is amoral, then what is the point of ethics and purpose in life? The uncertainty that accompanies cosmic horror compels us to face realities that may demolish our comprehension. It's like an ant on a smartphone, fixated on the surface and oblivious to the complex systems beneath. Transhumanism asks, what if humanity could? Transhumanism is a fast-expanding field of thought that blends philosophy, ethics, and cutting-edge science to envision a future where humans are no longer constrained by aging, disease, or death. Our bodies and minds can be enhanced beyond anything nature ever intended. The movement's basic premise is that technology can help us overcome our biological limitations and redefine our human identity. Premise: humans have evolved to adapt to our environment through natural selection, but transhumanists contend that we can now control our own progress. Technological advancements in fields like neuroscience, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and nanotechnology are allowing us to radically change our lifestyles, thoughts, and interactions with the world. One of the main tenets of transhumanism is the idea that we can eventually do away with the physical weaknesses that come with aging. Modern medicine has made tremendous advances in treating diseases, but transhumanists imagine a future where cellular repair, genetic editing, and therapies that target the causes of aging could one day make the dream of an infinitely longer lifespan, or even immortality, a reality. Transhumanism aims to expand human intelligence and cognitive capabilities, not just physical enhancement. It is not limited to the eradication of diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's, and heart disease. Gene editing tools like CRISPR are being used to correct genetic defects and strengthen immunity. Advances in prosthetics and bioengineering are enabling the replacement of damaged organs and tissues with more durable and efficient alternatives. Imagine a future where our minds can communicate directly with machines. This technology could improve our memory, problem-solving skills, and even open up new avenues of creativity and expression. Transhumanism is a philosophy of improvement, but it raises serious ethical questions about who will have access to these technologies and how they will be used. Accessible to all, or will they widen the gap between the privileged and the rest of society? Skeptics fear a future where money controls not only material comfort, but also biological advantage, deepening current inequities and dividing society into technological haves and have-nots. Another ethical concern is the question of identity as we become more integrated with technology. When enough parts of our bodies and minds are replaced with artificial components, where does one's humanity end and machine begin? If we could eliminate suffering, extend life indefinitely, and enhance our cognitive abilities, what would life look like? For some, this utopian vision offers endless opportunities for growth, exploration, and transhumanism delves into philosophical questions about purpose and meaning. Are you still here? Transhumanists argue that identity is not tied to biology, but to consciousness and experience. This challenges long-held notions of humanity and forces us to reconsider the boundaries of personhood. Some worry that the pursuit of transhumanism's perfection overlooks the unintended consequences of altering complex biological systems, while others worry that the focus on enhancement distracts from addressing pressing global issues like poverty. If struggle and limitation are integral to the human experience, then what happens when those elements are removed? One of the most contentious parts of transhumanism is the idea that we could transcend death by transferring our thoughts, memories, and personalities into a digital format. This concept, often called mind uploading, suggests that we could achieve a form of immortality by doing so. However, transhumanists argue that their vision is not about escaping these challenges, but rather about solving them more effectively. Some argue that transhumanism could help alleviate the strain on the planet's resources by enhancing human efficiency, such as reducing the need for food or energy. Others point to the risks of technological overreach, while this possibility still remains speculative. If your mind can be copied into a digital format, is that truly you or just a replica? What happens to the original you? Potentially disastrous effects on ecosystems and biodiversity could result from unchecked technological progress. This begs the question, will we be satisfied to stay the same, or will we use science and technology to radically alter our identity? The answer should inspire contemplation of our values, goals, and duties. Optimists in the transhumanist movement hold that by expanding our understanding of what is possible, we can build a future in which humanity flourishes in ways we have never imagined. Here we are at a pivotal juncture in human history, where the question is not merely whether we can, but should enhance humanity, but also what kind of future we want to create as a collective. Whether this future is one of liberation or division, progress or peril, depends on how we navigate the opportunities and risks of this extraordinary moment. The journey of transhumanism is just beginning, and it promises to be both exciting and challenging. Philosophical pessimism asks us to confront the harsh realities of life with honesty, challenging our assumptions about progress, happiness, and the meaning of life. Its foundations can be traced back to the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. This star view is at the core of philosophical pessimism, a school of thought that challenges the optimism often associated with human existence. The will to live, according to Schopenhauer, is a blind and insatiable force that motivates all living beings. This will comes out as a never-ending pursuit of happiness, where one desire leads to another, creating a vicious cycle of disappointment and temporary fulfillment. Schopenhauer thought that this never-ending pursuit was not only tiring, but also futile because it kept people from ever being satisfied and from ever moving beyond their own personal struggles. While existentialism is often associated with Friedrich Nietzsche, another influential voice in philosophical pessimism, suffering is intrinsic to existence and impacts all living beings. Predators hunt prey, illnesses affect the body, and death looms over every life. While moments of pleasure or happiness do exist, they are fleeting and frequently come at the cost of others. Schopenhauer saw that, also grappled with pessimistic ideas. Inch proposed a philosophy of affirmation that challenged Schopenhauer's resignation to life's suffering. He acknowledged the harshness of existence, but argued that we must embrace life's struggles and chaos as essential parts of being alive. Recognizing life's difficulties doesn't demand despair. It calls for a reevaluation of how we confront and interpret those difficulties. Romanian philosopher Emil Sorin's works also convey philosophical pessimism. Sorin's writing delves into the theme of suffering from a personal perspective. It is filled with contemplations on the absurdity of existence, the certainty of death, and the frailty of human ambitions. Life, according to Sorin, is a never-ending battle against despair, where glimpses of clarity sometimes expose the hollowness beneath our pursuits. Philosophical pessimism, rather than being a solution, is a prism through which to view life more clearly. One of the most intriguing features of philosophical pessimism is its critique of. Philosophical pessimists argue that although circumstances may change, the fundamental nature of human suffering remains constant. They point out that technological advancements might alleviate certain hardships, but they often create new forms of discontent. Similarly, societal progress might improve living conditions, but it cannot eliminate existential suffering or the limitations of any given system. Yet, many people believe in the idea of continuous improvement, whether through personal growth, society, or technology. As a philosophical perspective on mortality, pessimism challenges the idea of happiness as an end in itself. Rather than striving for an idealized state of contentment, pessimists advise us to embrace life as it is, flaws and all. This does not imply giving up, but rather learning to navigate life without the relentless pressure to discover ultimate fulfillment. There is solace in philosophical pessimism, which emphasizes solidarity in suffering and the universality of pain and struggle. This perspective encourages us to care for one another, not because life is perfect, but because we are all navigating its challenges together. On the other hand, philosophical pessimism offers a counterbalance to excessive optimism by highlighting the importance of connection and compassion in the face of suffering. Philosophical pessimism is often criticized for being overly negative or defeatist, but its proponents argue that it simply serves as a reminder that struggle is a normal and valid part of life. By approaching life with a sense of realism and acknowledging its difficulties without being consumed by them, pessimism can be a grounding force that helps us maintain perspective in the face of hardship. Challenges can lead us to overlook its potential, joy, and beauty. However, many pessimists would argue differently. They don't deny the existence of joy and beauty. They just refuse to ignore the suffering that comes along with it. For pessimists, understanding and appreciating life requires acknowledging the full range of human experience, including its darker sides. Philosophical pessimism, on the other hand, doesn't offer easy answers or comforting illusions, a promise of a better future, or a hidden purpose behind life's struggles. Philosophical pessimism is not a philosophy of despair, but of honesty. It asks us to look at life without flinching, to acknowledge its hardships without turning away, and in doing so, it offers a deeper understanding of what it means to be human. It challenges us to confront existence as it is, without sugar-coating or avoiding it. Even though it's difficult, this confrontation can be liberating by letting go of unrealistic expectations. Animal suffering and theodicy. If God is good and powerful, then why does innocent suffering exist, particularly among creatures that are incapable of moral failings? This central question in animal suffering in theodicy challenges religious and philosophical thought. Animals have endured suffering for millions of years from predators, diseases, starvation, and natural disasters. Unlike humans, they're unable to rationalize or find meaning in their suffering. Various theota have been put forth by theists to reconcile suffering with divine benevolence. One such defense is the greater good defense, which posits that animal suffering serves a larger divine plan. For example, in the famous For in the Forest thought experiment, a fawn caught in a wildfire suffers immensely before dying alone. This raises the question, what purpose does this serve if none exists? Ecosystems that promote complexity, while others put forth the free will defense, which states that the unpredictable nature of the natural world is a necessary condition for human freedom. However, critics like David Atfield contend that this defense fails because animal suffering appears excessive, gratuitous, and beyond. John Hick also suggested that suffering is essential for soul-making, moral-shaping development. As an ethical framework, negative utilitarianism is both striking and controversial. Unlike traditional utilitarianism, which aims to increase the overall amount of happiness, negative utilitarianism argues that reducing or eliminating pain should take precedence over the pursuit of pleasure. It is based on the idea that in a world where the ultimate moral goal is not to maximize happiness, but to minimize suffering. Recognizing the power of suffering over happiness, it is often argued that avoiding misery and suffering should take precedence. This is because relieving pain directly improves the quality of life for individuals who are suffering, while pleasure is fleeting and can enhance one's existence. Karl Popper, an early proponent of this view, argued that this was the case. Negative utilitarianism forces us to question how much we value happiness and how much we value pain relief. In many cases, focusing on pain relief seems obvious and simple. For instance, helping those in need, providing medical care to the sick, and resolving mental health crises are all actions that fall under this framework. However, negative utilitarianism goes beyond these solutions, concerns itself with larger, more existential questions than with specific instances. A contentious part of negative utilitarianism is the idea that extreme measures might be justified if the world's suffering exceeds its happiness. For example, according to some interpretations, if life inherently brings suffering, then it might be morally justifiable to stop future lives from being born. This view is in line with antinatalist philosophies, which contend that. Opponents of negative utilitarianism frequently point out the dangers of its extreme implications, arguing that an excessive emphasis on eradicating suffering could cause people to make moral judgments that disregard the worth of joy, fulfillment, and contentment. As an example, if one applies the reasoning of negative utilitarianism to its extreme, it forces us to confront difficult questions regarding the essence of life and the ethics of creating life in a world where pain is inevitable. The extreme version of negative utilitarianism could lead to the justification of killing all sentient beings in order to stop future pain, which would be fraught with ethical and practical problems. Most negative utilitarians would reject this extreme view, but it does highlight the philosophy's inherent tension. Another problem is that measuring pain is difficult. What one person finds excruciating, another might bear with ease. Despite these challenges, negative utilitarianism continues to provide valuable insights into ethical decision-making. It encourages us to prioritize the reduction of suffering in situations where resources are limited and difficult choices must be made, such as in global health. However, the variability in these situations makes it difficult to consistently apply the theory, especially at the societal level. How can we weigh the suffering of different individuals or groups? How can we balance immediate pain against the potential for long-term well-being? By putting an emphasis on the most immediate needs, this framework can direct policies that aim to treat the most serious diseases or ease the most severe hardships. However, negative utilitarianism also encourages us to reflect on our own relationship with suffering, challenging cultural narratives that portray suffering as a means to an end rather than a means to an end in and of itself. Recognizing the weight of suffering can help us develop greater empathy and responsibility toward others. Our ultimate goal should be to create a world where unnecessary pain is minimized. Negative utilitarianism is not about denying the value of happiness, but about recognizing the profound moral urgency of suffering. It calls us to confront the darker aspects of existence with honesty and resolve, and it reminds us that even small acts of kindness and care can make a difference. As a result, we should strive to cultivate these qualities. Philosophy may bring up challenging questions and invite criticism, but it also brings attention to a truth that resonates deeply. The goal of alleviating suffering is fundamental and deeply human. This goal transcends cultural and philosophical divides. It asks us to pursue happiness, but to make sure that we don't lose sight of those who are suffering the most. The question then becomes, why is there suffering if we live in a world that can produce beauty, joy, and love? In addition to being a part of being human, the question of suffering, which encompasses a wide range of experiences, from physical pain from injuries to emotional anguish from loss, has persisted for centuries, casting a shadow over our collective consciousness and questioning our very existence. At its core, the problem of suffering asks not only why suffering happens, but also what it means and how we should react to it. But what makes suffering so puzzling is that it affects every sentient being regardless of their wealth, power, or lack thereof. This fact alone prompts deep questions like, is suffering necessary? Is it random? But does it have a deeper purpose? Philosophers and thinkers have taken various approaches to this problem. And for believers in a higher power, suffering presents a theological dilemma. Why does God, who is both all-powerful and all-loving, allow suffering? Enables suffering to exist? This question, often called the problem of evil, has sparked centuries of debate. Some say that suffering is a way for people to grow spiritually or test their faith. Others say that it's a result of human free will, a necessary byproduct of our ability to choose. However, these explanations don't always seem sufficient when we consider the immense scale of pain caused by things like natural disasters, diseases, and tragedies that seem to happen in this world. Many viewpoints on suffering tend to center on its biological and evolutionary origins. Physiological pain, for example, plays a crucial role in warning organisms of danger. Without this sense, we would not be able to tell when something is hot or sick, and emotional suffering, like physical pain, has its origins in the need to protect ourselves from danger. Existentialist philosophers such as Friedrich Nietzsche and Jean-Paul Sartre saw suffering as an inherent component of existence, one that compels us to seek significance in a meaningless cosmos. Nietzsche famously stated, "To live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. However, comprehending the rationale behind suffering does not alleviate its impact. Rather, it raises the question of why life must be constructed on such a precarious foundation." Contrarily, Sartre viewed suffering as an inevitable byproduct of human freedom. He believed that while we have the power to hope and dream, this also exposes us to the possibility of disappointment and spares us from certain things. In this view, suffering is intrinsic to the human experience. It is the price we pay for the richness of life. As an alternative, one school of thought considers suffering to be fundamental too. In his teachings, the Buddha recognized suffering also known as dukkha, as the first of the Four Noble Truths. According to Buddhist teachings, suffering results from desires for pleasure, permanence, and control, which are at odds with the transient and ever-changing nature of reality. The Buddhist path, however, offers a means to alleviate suffering through practices such as mindfulness, ethical living, and wisdom cultivation. Although it does not eliminate pain entirely, it does provide tools for understanding and acceptance. The field of modern psychology provides valuable insights into the nature and impact of suffering. By studying how our minds perceive and magnify pain, researchers have found that a significant portion of our suffering stems from the narratives we tell ourselves about difficult events. For instance, after a devastating job loss, it's common to feel even worse because of thoughts like "I'll never succeed" or "I'm a failure." Mindfulness practices and cognitive behavioral therapy work to dispel these negative self-perceptions. While patterns can help people reframe their experiences and lessen the emotional impact of suffering, the issue has recently taken on new dimensions due to the rise of transhumanism and artificial intelligence. Some thinkers contend that technology could one day eradicate suffering, either by re-engineering the human brain or by creating painless digital environments. This vision, however, poses ethical and philosophical questions and challenges the assumption that each of us faces suffering in our own lives, grappling with its meaning and impact. Some find solace in faith or philosophy, others in the support of loved ones or the pursuit of justice. What unites us is the shared experience of wrestling with pain and the search for a better world. Suffering is an inevitable part of life, but should we really try to eliminate it? Is there a deeper purpose that we would sacrifice in the process? The paradox of suffering is that it is both universal and deeply personal, essential and intolerable. It shows how fragile life is, yet how resilient it is. And although we may never find a solution to suffering, the ways in which we face it shape our identities and our lives. Perhaps the most important lesson we can learn from suffering is how it brings us together, how it reminds us of our common humanity, and how it inspires compassion, courage, and the relentless quest for understanding. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard grappled with the question of God's silence, viewing it not as a lack of presence, but as a challenge to one's faith. According to Kierkegaard, faith is the paradox between an endless desire for introspection and the objective uncertainty surrounding it. In his view, this silence necessitated a leap into the unknown, a trust in God, rather than simply asking if God exists. In the absence of concrete evidence, philosophers such as Simone V. The silence of God takes on a paradoxical quality in the context of suffering. While believing that God's silence was not a sign of abandonment, but rather an invitation to discover meaning in struggle, she argued that Christianity's strength lies in its refusal to seek a supernatural solution to suffering, but rather a supernatural purpose for it. However, this raises a darker question. What if the silence isn't a test or a mystery, but simply silence? What if there is no divine voice, no presence, no answer, and the eternal torment of? The essence of samsara, the Buddhist concept of reincarnation, is not a single life or a metaphor for hardship, but rather the endless repetition of existence itself, governed by karma, the law of cause and effect. Every action has an impact on subsequent lives. Even good karma ties you to samsara as long as ignorance, desire, and attachment remain. What makes samsara truly torturous, however, is not. Just like sand through fingers, life's joys, love, success, and comfort are impermanent and inevitably lead to disappointment. Juna compared samsara to a sea of suffering, wherein all beings, from insects to kings, are bound by the same karmic chains. Buddhism teaches that ignorance is the root of this suffering. We mistake the transient for the eternal, therefore the painful for. On the hedonistic treadmill, happiness always seems just out of reach. We chase new goals, dream of bigger achievements, and tell ourselves that if we can only achieve these, we will finally be free. However, This utopian ideal is illusory because it fails to take into account the reality of our interconnected, transient, and ultimately meaningless world. This never-ending pursuit of happiness is referred to by psychologists as the hedonistic treadmill. It shows how we tend to quickly return to a baseline level of happiness, no matter what happens in our lives, when we achieve something we've long desired, like more money, success, or love. However, once we achieve these things, the satisfaction fades and the cycle begins again. This pattern isn't just anecdotal. Research supports it. When we experience positive changes, like a new job or a romantic relationship, we feel a surge of happiness. However, as we adjust to these changes, our happiness wanes. Similarly, when we go through negative changes like a job loss or a breakup, we feel a dip in happiness at first, but we eventually recover and return to our baseline. We tend to have unrealistic expectations about what will make us happy. We think that material wealth, social status, and other external factors can bring about a profound change in our lives. But in reality, it's more complex than that. People who win millions of dollars don't necessarily feel any happier a year later than they were before. And people who suffer setbacks usually find ways to adapt to their new circumstances and regain their sense of well-being. The hedonistic treadmill has its origins in human evolution. In those times, staying alive required continual effort. Those who became complacent were less likely to survive. So things like the dream house and dream jobs became just that, houses and jobs, respectively. This adaptation is what keeps us on the treadmill, constantly seeking out new things that might finally bring lasting fulfillment. This insatiable need for more may have worked for our ancestors in the past, but in today's world, it can lead to feelings of unfulfillment no matter what we accomplish or own. By gaining insight into the hedonistic treadmill, we can escape its clutches. One key finding is that there is a diminishing return on happiness from material wealth and external success. While money can alleviate financial stress and meet basic needs, it can only do so much. Studies show that experiences, such as traveling or spending time with loved ones, bring more lasting happiness than material goods. This is partly because experiences create memories and deepen our connection to the world around us. But it doesn't stop many of us from chasing after wealth, thinking it will be the key to a fulfilled life. Gratitude is a valuable tool for combating the effects of hedonic adaptation. By actively valuing what we already have, we can shift our focus from what's missing to what's present. Research has shown that practicing gratitude increases happiness, decreases stress, and improves our quality of life. Investing in relationships, personal growth, and meaningful activities can provide a sense of fulfillment that material success often fails to offer. The importance of relationships and learning to appreciate what we already have cannot be overstated. Mindfulness can help us break free from the hedonistic treadmill by bringing us into the present moment and allowing us to enjoy life's simple pleasures without constantly seeking more. It reminds us that happiness is not a destination, but a state of being, and it helps us recognize when we're caught in the cycle of wanting. Life is full of ups and downs, but by understanding how hedonic adaptation works, we can approach these fluctuations with greater awareness and find balance. The hedonistic treadmill doesn't mean we should stop striving or setting goals. Ambition, progress, and resilience are essential parts of life. However, it does challenge us to reevaluate why we pursue happiness. It's important to reflect on our pursuits and whether they truly bring us happiness. As we run, we should ask ourselves if we're making progress or just going in circles. The treadmill isn't about what we chase, but rather how we engage with life. By shifting our focus from external achievements to internal contentment, we can break free from the never-ending cycle of striving and find lasting joy. We can embrace the present moment with mindfulness and purpose, savoring each step along the way, rather than fixating on a distant goal. Jean-Paul Sartre's seminal statement in Being and Nothingness encapsulates his existentialist philosophy. People aren't born with a fixed nature or purpose, but rather, we shape our essence through our deeds and decisions. Being in itself and being for itself are two ways of being. Being in itself describes inanimate objects like rocks and chairs that don't have any capacity for self-reflection or transformation. Being for itself, on the other hand, describes human consciousness as incomparable and constantly changing, defined by its capacity to reflect, choose, and imagine possibilities. It's important to Aurelius' philosophy that consciousness introduces a gap between these two ways of being. The chasm that separates us from the rest of the universe lets us dream big and do what we want, but it also comes with a heavy weight: the duty to shape our own lives and the lives of future generations according to the choices we make. This idea is central to antinatalism, a philosophical school of thought. To illustrate, picture yourself in possession of a magical key that could bring about. The question of whether to turn the key lies at the core of antinatalism, a philosophy that argues against creating new life. One prominent thinker, David Beneder, presents this dilemma. Would you turn the key to bring into existence a brand new person who will experience life in all its glory and suffering? But wait, there's a catch. The life you create will not be guaranteed to be joyful and full of wonder, or it might be marked by intolerable pain and despair. The person you create doesn't have a say in whether they want to exist. The decision is entirely up to you. In his book, Better Never to Have Been, he presents an intriguing argument based on the idea of an asymmetry in existence. According to him, if someone isn't born, they don't have to worry about experiencing pain or happiness, which is okay because they don't exist. On the other hand, if someone is born, they will inevitably suffer, even if they also experience joy. Beneder argues that the potential benefits of pain outweigh the risks of pleasure. In his view, the act of creating life is fundamentally unfair because it imposes. Punishing someone who had no say in the matter isn't the only thing antinatalism is about. It's also based on the harsh realities of our world. Even the wealthiest people experience heartbreak, anxiety, and the unavoidable fear of death. Every new life is another victim thrust into this unpredictable and frequently cruel theater. Some antinatalists contend that in a prominent figure in the antinatalism movement, philosopher Julio Cabrera, takes a moral stance, arguing that procreation goes against the principles of ethical behavior. According to Cabrera, the act of creating life disregards the consent of the person being born, imposing risks and burdens without their agreement, making the act of bringing a new life into existence an act of willful ignorance or selfishness in a world where suffering is so pervasive. Beyond the individual suffering, antinatalism addresses the collective impact of human existence. Environmental thinkers like Les Yuan, founder of the voluntary human extinction movement, argue that ceasing human reproduction could be a compassionate choice for both humans and the planet. Cabrera goes even farther, suggesting that bringing a child into the world is not an act of love, but an act of power, a decision made unilaterally by the parent. Knights, think about it. There's no denying that humans have wreaked havoc on our planet. From deforestation to climate change, the ecological cost of humanity is staggering. However, antinatalists like Knight see a world without humans as a way to bring nature back into balance, a place where it can thrive without us. But antinatalists would argue that there are other, more valuable things in life, like the thrill of discovery, the warmth of love, and the laughter of children. The beauty of life does not eradicate its inherent cruelty, according to antinatalists. Critics of antinatalism often accuse it of being too pessimistic or even nihilistic, but many antinatalists would claim that for every moment of happiness, there's a shadow of loss, the weight of uncertainty, and the inevitability of suffering. Even those who find meaning in their lives must confront this harsh reality. They contend that antinatalism is not a rejection of humanity, but a profound act of empathy. Rather, it is a philosophy that recognizes the immense burden of life and chooses not to impose it on another being. Now, going back to that magical key, would you use it knowing the risks? Would you invite someone into a world where suffering is certain even if happiness is possible, or would you choose to leave? Antinatalism doesn't insist on a solution. It merely asks us to think about the question. By doing so, it questions one of the most basic human assumptions, that it is always a good thing to create new life. Eco-philosophy. In our quest to meet human needs, we have built a world that frequently forgets its origins. Cities grow, resources are extracted, and ecosystems are reshaped. But at what cost? Environmental philosophy delves into the ethical, spiritual, and philosophical aspects of our natural surroundings, challenging the anthropocentric mindset that holds humans inherently superior to all other forms of life. It seeks to reevaluate our connection with the natural world, reevaluating our place in it, and ultimately putting all ecosystems and life forms on an equal basis. According to eco-philosophers, nature isn't there just for us to exploit. Rather, we should view ourselves as interdependent nodes in a vast web. One major school of thought within eco-philosophy, known as deep ecology, emerged in the 1970s and was popularized by Norwegian philosopher Ere and C. This school of thought argues that traditional environmentalists focus on surface-level issues like pollution and resource management, which are certainly important, but that these approaches only mask the problem. The fundamental reason for environmental deterioration, the broken bond between humans and the natural world. Deep ecology asks us to shift from a shallow utilitarian view of the environment to a deeper understanding of the intrinsic value of all living beings. Under this framework, a tree is not valuable because it provides wood or absorbs carbon dioxide. It is valuable simply because it exists. This perspective challenges the exploitative mindset that has driven much of human progress, inviting us to see the natural world as a community to which we belong rather than a resource to be used. At the heart of deep ecology is the principle of biocentric equality, the idea that all living things have an equal right to live and flourish. This doesn't mean humans should abandon their needs or desires, but it does call for a radical reevaluation of our priorities. It asks us to consider the impact of our actions on the entire web of life, not just on ourselves. By recognizing the interconnectedness of all beings, deep ecology seeks to foster a sense of humility and responsibility. The implications of deep ecology are profound. It challenges the economic systems that prioritize growth and consumption over ecological balance. It questions the narratives of human exceptionalism that have justified the destruction of habitats and species, and it calls for a transformation in how we approach everything from agriculture to energy production, emphasizing sustainability and coexistence over exploitation. Philosophers and activists within the deep ecology movement often highlight the spiritual dimensions of this perspective. They argue that reconnecting with nature is not just an ecological necessity, but a path to personal and collective well-being. Many indigenous traditions, for example, have long embraced the idea that humans are part of a larger natural order with responsibilities to the land and its inhabitants. Deep ecology draws inspiration from these worldviews, seeking to integrate them into modern environmental thought. Critics of deep ecology sometimes argue that its principles are too idealistic or impractical in a world driven by economic and political interests. They question whether humanity can truly prioritize the needs of ecosystems over its own short-term goals. Others worry that deep ecology's emphasis on biocentric equality could lead to difficult ethical dilemmas, such as how to balance human survival with the protection of other species. These criticisms highlight the tension between deep ecology's vision and the realities of human society. Despite these challenges, deep ecology offers a powerful lens through which to view the environmental crises of our time. It reminds us that the destruction of ecosystems is not just an environmental issue, it is a moral and philosophical failure. By treating nature as a commodity, we undermine the very systems that sustain life. Deep ecology invites us to imagine a different future, one where humanity lives in harmony with the earth, respecting its limits and celebrating its diversity. Eco-philosophy and deep ecology also provide practical guidance for individuals and communities. They encourage local sustainable practices that reduce harm to the environment. They promote education and awareness about the interdependence of life, and they inspire grassroots movements that challenge the systems and policies driving ecological destruction. These efforts may not solve every problem, but they represent a crucial step toward aligning human activities with the principles of deep ecology, perhaps the most radical aspect of eco-philosophy and deep ecology is their call for a shift in consciousness. They ask us to move beyond seeing nature as something separate from ourselves and instead recognize that we're deeply embedded within it. This shift is not easy. It requires confronting long-held beliefs, rethinking our values, and accepting that humanity is not the pinnacle of life, but one part of a larger whole in a world facing climate change, biodiversity loss, and resource depletion. The ideas of eco-philosophy and deep ecology are more relevant than ever. They challenge us to look beyond immediate solutions and address the deeper issues at the heart of the environmental crisis. They remind us that the health of the planet is inseparable from our own well-being, and that by caring for the Earth, we are ultimately caring for ourselves. Eco-philosophy and deep ecology may not offer quick fixes, but they provide a vision of what is possible, a world where humanity learns to live within its means, respects the rights of all beings, and finds meaning not in domination, but in connection. This vision is both a challenge and an invitation, calling us to rethink what it means to be human in a world that is infinitely larger and more complex than ourselves. Panopticism. What if you were always being watched, but never knew? When would you act differently? This is the essence of panopticism, a concept from philosopher Michel Foucault. In Discipline and Punish, it reveals how the possibility of observation shapes behavior and extends control far beyond physical walls. Foucault was inspired by the Panopticon, a prison design by Jeremy Benham. The design featured a circular structure with cells surrounding a central watchtower. Guards could observe prisoners without being seen, creating a state of conscious and permanent visibility. The genius wasn't in constant observation, but in making prisoners think they could be watched at any moment. Foucault expanded this into a metaphor for modern power. Panopticism, he argued, isn't about actual surveillance. It's about the fear of it. The mere possibility of being watched leads people to regulate themselves, turning surveillance into self-discipline. A real subjection, Foucault wrote, is born mechanically from a fictitious relation. This principle pervades modern life. Security cameras, workplace monitoring, even social media. Do you post to express yourself or to shape how others perceive you? Panopticism shifts power from external enforcement to internal compliance. It also extends beyond technology. Schools, hospitals, and governments use observation and categorization to influence behavior. Foucault argued that modern societies move from physical punishment to psychological control. Subtle but effective panopticism raises critical questions. How much of our freedom is illusion? Who's watching? And why? Awareness of this dynamic offers a chance to resist. The power of panopticism isn't in being watched, it's in believing we are, and recognizing that belief is the first step toward reclaiming control. Simulation theory. What if everything you know, every moment of joy, every hardship, and every thought exists within a simulation? Simulation theory proposes that our reality might not be the fundamental one, but a creation of advanced beings or systems. It suggests that what we perceive as physical and concrete might be no more real than the worlds inside a video game. The implications are staggering, especially when considering suffering. If our lives are simulated, does suffering hold the same way we, and what does it mean for how we understand pain, ethics, and existence? Simulation theory gained prominence through thinkers like Nick Bostrom, who argued that if advanced civilizations develop the ability to simulate realities indistinguishable from their own, and if they choose to create many such simulations, it becomes statistically likely that we are living in one. While this idea might sound like science fiction, it rests on logic possibilities. The future development of computing power, the motivations of simulated beings, and the indistinguishability of simulated experiences from real ones, if we are indeed living in a simulation. The nature of suffering becomes deeply complicated in a physical reality. Pain and suffering are tied to biological processes, damage to the body, illness, or emotional distress, these experiences carry weight because they're directly connected to survival and well-being. But if our reality is simulated, suffering could be seen as something programmed into our experience. This raises the unsettling question: is suffering necessary in a simulated world, or is it intentionally designed into the system? One possibility is that suffering exists because it adds depth and realism to the simulation. If the beings creating the simulation intended to replicate a reality as close to their own as possible, suffering might be an inescapable part of that design. After all, struggle, loss, and hardship are integral to the human experience, shaping our choices, relationships, and sense of meaning. Without suffering, life might lack the contrast that makes joy and fulfillment meaningful. In this sense, suffering could be viewed as a deliberate feature of the simulation, not a flaw. Another perspective is that suffering, but whether we could serve an entirely different purpose, one unknown to us. If we are part of an experiment or a study conducted by the beings who created the simulation, suffering might be a variable they're observing. It could help them understand how simulated beings respond to adversity, or how systems of morality and resilience develop under challenging conditions. In this scenario, our pain might have meaning, but not one we can comprehend within the limits of the simulation. This leads to profound ethical questions about the beings or entities running the simulation. If they have the power to eliminate suffering, are they morally obligated to do so? In human terms, creating a world filled with pain might seem cruel. Yet it's also possible that the creators see the simulation differently, as something akin to art, a learning tool, or a system that transcends human notions of morality. Their perspective might render the concept of cruelty meaningless. The possibility of simulated suffering also forces us to reevaluate our sense of agency in a simulated world. Are our actions and choices truly our own, or are they predetermined by the system? If suffering is pre-programmed, do we have any responsibility for how we experience it, or how we alleviate the suffering of others? These questions challenge the foundations of ethics and free will, leaving us to grapple with whether simulated beings can hold moral accountability for those who find simulation theory plausible. The implications for how we approach suffering in daily life are complex. On one hand, viewing suffering as part of a simulation might diminish its emotional impact. If pain is merely a construct, perhaps it doesn't need to be taken so seriously. On the other hand, the realization that suffering is programmed into the system could deepen its poignancy as it becomes a reminder of our lack of control over the fundamental nature of our reality. Yet even within the framework of simulation theory, suffering retains a profound immediacy. Whether real or simulated, pain feels real to the one experiencing it. A broken bone, the loss of a loved one, or the sting of rejection affects us deeply, regardless of whether it arises from biological processes or lines of code. This highlights a paradox of simulation theory. Even if our reality is an illusion, our experiences are not diminished. They remain powerful, vivid, and deeply meaningful to us. Simulation theory also raises the possibility that we are not passive participants but active creators within the simulation. If we are simulated beings capable of understanding the nature of our reality, could we also influence or reshape it? This idea opens up a hopeful dimension, suggesting that even in a simulated world, we might have the power to confront and reduce suffering through our actions, empathy, and ingenuity. Ultimately, simulation theory forces us to confront fundamental questions about existence and meaning. If our reality is simulated, does that make it less valuable or significant, or does the very fact that we experience consciousness, joy, and suffering imbue it with its own kind of reality? These questions are not easy to answer, but they remind us that the nature of reality, whether simulated or not, does not diminish the importance of how we live, how we treat others, and how we make sense of our lives. In the end, the possibility that we live in a simulation doesn't provide clear answers about suffering. It does, however, challenge us to rethink our assumptions about reality, agency, and the human experience. Whether our lives are the result of random chance biological processes or The design of an advanced civilization. Our experiences remain undeniably real to us. Simulation, or not, the choices we make in the face of suffering define who we are and shape the world we inhabit. The absurd life demands meaning, but the universe refuses to provide it. This is the heart of the absurd, a concept explored by the French philosopher Albert Camus. It describes the fundamental conflict between our human need to find purpose and the universe's cold indifference. The absurd is not a problem to be solved or a puzzle to be unraveled. It is a condition of existence that we must learn to live with. Camus believed that by confronting the absurd directly, we could find a unique form of freedom and joy. The absurd arises from our unrelenting search for answers. As humans, we crave explanations for why we exist, why we suffer, and what it all means. We turn to religion, philosophy, science, and art to satisfy this hunger. But no matter how hard we look, the universe remains silent. It offers no ultimate answers, no grand purpose, and no comforting design. This silence can feel like a betrayal, as though the universe is withholding something we are entitled to. Yet Camus argues this tension between our need for meaning and the universe's indifference is not a failure of existence. It is simply the way things are. The absurd is not just a theoretical idea. It is something we encounter in everyday life. Imagine working tirelessly toward a good goal only to realize that it doesn't bring the satisfaction you expected, or consider the repetition of daily routines, waking up, eating, working, sleeping, and doing it all over again. These moments expose the gap between our expectations and reality, between the meaning we seek and the emptiness we often find. The absurd reveals itself in these moments not as a dramatic revelation, but as an unsettling reminder of life's contradictions. For Camus, the absurd is not something to escape or overcome. It is a reality to be confronted. In many people, when faced with the absurd, attempt to resolve it through what Camus called philosophical. This occurs when someone abandons their quest for meaning by embracing a pre-packaged answer, such as religious faith or ideological dogma. By doing so, they surrender their freedom and reject the very tension that makes life interesting. Camus rejected this approach, insisting that the absurd must not be denied or ignored. The absurd also raises the question of whether life is worth living. If there is no ultimate purpose, why bother with existence at all? Camus called this the only serious philosophical question. His response was not resignation or despair, but defiance. He argued that the absence of meaning does not diminish the value of life. Instead, it gives us the freedom to create our own meaning. By accepting the absurd, we can live authentically, embracing the fleeting beauty and chaos of life without pretending it must serve a higher purpose. Camus used the myth of Copus to illustrate his philosophy of the absurd. In Greek mythology, Copus is condemned to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only for it to roll back down each time he nears the top. This endless repetition could easily be seen as a metaphor for futility and despair, but Camus reimagined Copus as a figure of rebellion and strength. He argued that Cop's task is no different from our own. We too face struggles that seem pointless in a universe without inherent meaning, yet by embracing his fate and continuing to push the boulder, Copus asserts his freedom and defies the absurd. Camus concluded his essay by declaring one must imagine Copus happy. This vision of happiness is not about denial or false hope. It is about finding joy in the act of living itself, even when life offers no guarantees. The absurd reminds us that our lives are ours to shape without a cosmic plan to follow. We are free to pursue what brings us fulfillment, whether that is love, creation, active ity, or the simple pleasure of being alive. In this sense, the absurd is not a curse, but an opportunity to live fully and honestly. Q's philosophy of the absurd also challenges traditional ideas of success and failure. In a meaningless universe, external measures of achievement lose their significance. What matters is not whether we accomplish great things or leave a lasting legacy, but whether we engage with life authentically and courageously. This perspective liberates us from the pressure to conform to societal expectations or chase goals that do not truly resonate with us. The absurd is not an easy philosophy to embrace. It requires us to let go of comforting illusions and face the world as it is, but in doing so, it offers a profound form of freedom. It teaches us to stop searching for answers that do not exist and instead focus on the experience of living. The absurd reminds us that life's meaning is not something we find, it is something we create. In the end, the absurd is both a challenge and a gift. It asks us to confront the contradictions of existence without flinching, to live with uncertainty and still find joy. Camus believed that this acceptance of the absurd was the ultimate act of rebellion, a refusal to be defeated by life's lack of meaning. By embracing the absurd, we reclaim our freedom and discover a happiness that is uniquely our own. Life, for all its strangeness and struggle, becomes an adventure worth living. The shadow. There's a part of you refuse to see, a hidden side you deny or project onto others. Kung called this the shadow. It's always there, influencing who you are, whether you acknowledge it or not. Jung believed the shadow contains everything we reject about ourselves, our dark impulses, forbidden desires, and unacknowledged flaws. But it's not just evil, it's any part of you that doesn't align with the image you want to project. The shadow is born when we suppress these traits, often in childhood, to meet societal or familial expectations. Paradoxically, the more we suppress the shadow, the more control it gains. Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you'll call it fate. Your shadow manifests in subtle ways. Anger, you project envy, disguised as criticism or insecurities driving your choices. Jung called the process of confronting the shadow integration. It's not about indulging impulses, but understanding them. By facing the shadow, you achieve individuation, becoming a whole, authentic self. Suppressed traits like ambition or creativity can transform into strengths when acknowledged. The undead God is dead ends. Unsettling proclamation in the gay science signaled the collapse of divine authority, leaving humanity untethered. But what if God isn't truly gone? What if God lingers, not alive, but undead, a shadow embedded in our morality, culture, and subconscious? This is the concept of the undead God, a deity stripped of power, yet haunting our values and institutions. N's warning wasn't about atheism's triumph, but the danger of clinging to systems rooted in a belief we've abandoned. He saw humanity as trapped in the remnants of old frameworks, unwilling to confront the void left behind. As he wrote, "What are these morals if they are not the shadows of God?" Shadow of shadows. The problem is stark. Without God, what justifies concepts like good and evil, justice and freedom? And argued that these ideals, once grounded in divine command, now float unearned. We reject religious authority, yet treat these values as sacred absolutes, even as their foundations crumble. Modern life offers unsettling proof. Ideals like equality and morality are upheld as self-evident truths, yet they remain tethered to theological roots. We no longer acknowledge the undead God lives on, shaping our world, even as we deny its existence. Nature didn't merely diagnose this crisis, he demanded action. He urged us to slay the undead God by re-evaluating values and creating new ones free from inherited belief. This is the path of the Mensch, forging meaning in a world without absolutes. Are you living under the shadow of an undead God, or are you ready to confront the void and create meaning? A new nature's specter challenges us. The choice is yours. Ontological insecurity. What happens when your sense of reality feels unsteady, when the boundaries between self and world blur, and your very existence feels uncertain? This is ontological insecurity, a concept introduced by psychiatrist R.D. Laing in The Divided Self. It's not just a psychological state, it's a profound challenge to how we understand identity and existence. Laing describes ontological insecurity as the feeling that one's being is fragile or at risk of collapse. For most people, life unfolds on a stable stage. We trust our sense of self, our relationships, and the world. But for someone experiencing ontological insecurity, that stage is shaky. They might feel detached, questioning their perceptions or even their own coherence as a self. Laing identified 3 fears that define this state. First is engulfment, the fear of losing oneself in relationships or being consumed by others' demands. This leads to avoiding intimacy, to protect a fragile sense of self. Second is implosion, a dread of being overwhelmed by inner chaos or the vastness of existence itself. The third is petrification, the feeling of being seen as an object stripped of humanity and agency. Ontological insecurity often appears in conditions like schizophrenia or severe anxiety where self-world boundaries dissolve. Lang saw it not as pathology, but as a response to a chaotic or isolating world. This idea echoes existentialist philosophy. For SRA, the disorienting awareness of existence or nausea mirrors the destabilizing nature of ontological insecurity. Hygge concept of threats, being cast into a world beyond our control, captures our shared vulnerability. Lang believed understanding ontological insecurity begins with empathy. It forces us to confront the fragility of identity and ask what holds us together when reality itself feels unstable. The paradox of freedom. Freedom is the ultimate aspiration of humanity, yet it is often burdened with contradictions. The paradox of freedom lies in the tension between our desire for complete autonomy and the inevitable constraints that make freedom meaningful. It's a concept that has perplexed philosophers, writers, and thinkers throughout history, revealing that freedom is not as simple as it seems. Imagine a world where you could do absolutely anything, no laws, no expectations, no responsibilities. At first, it might sound exhilarating, but it quickly becomes overwhelming. Without structure or boundaries, choices lose their significance. If everything is permissible, nothing feels truly meaningful. This is the paradox. Absolute freedom can feel like no freedom at all. For freedom to matter, it must exist within limits. This paradox becomes clearer when we examine the relationship between freedom and responsibility. To be free is to have choices, but with choices come consequences. True freedom means owning those consequences, yet the weight of responsibility can feel restrictive. The more freedom we have, the more responsibility we bear, creating a delicate balance. For example, when a society grants individuals the freedom to speak and act as they wish, it must also establish systems of accountability to prevent harm. These rules, though they may appear to limit freedom, are what enable it to thrive. Philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre explored this tension through existentialism, emphasizing the burden of freedom. Sartre argued that humans are condemned to be free, meaning that we are forced to confront the full weight of our choices without the comfort of predetermined paths. This absolute freedom can feel paralyzing. If everything is a choice, how do we know what is right or meaningful? SRA believe that the answer lies in creating our own values, but this process is neither easy nor comforting. Freedom, in this sense, is both empowering and terrifying. Another layer of the paradox emerges when we consider freedom in the context of relationships and society. Humans are inherently social beings, and true freedom cannot exist in isolation, yet our interactions with others inevitably involve compromise. To live in harmony, we must sometimes limit our own freedom for the sake of others. This tension is evident in debates about laws and governance. While laws restrict individual behavior, they also create the stability necessary for collective freedom. Without laws, society would descend into chaos where the strong dominate the weak, and true freedom becomes impossible. For most, freedom also interacts with desire in paradoxical ways. When people think of freedom, they often imagine the ability to fulfill their desires without interference, but desires themselves can become a form of bondage, addiction, obsession, or even the relentless pursuit of success can trap us in cycles of dependency, eroding our sense of autonomy. In this way, unrestrained freedom to follow our impulses can lead to a loss of deeper freedom, the ability to act in alignment with our true selves. This idea is central to the philosophy of Stoicism, which teaches that true freedom comes not from external circumstances, but from mastery over our internal states. By cultivating self-discipline and focusing on what is within our control, we free ourselves from being enslaved by external events or emotions. For the Stoics, freedom is not the absence of constraints, but the ability to navigate them with wisdom and integrity. The paradox of freedom also manifests in the modern world's obsession with choice. We live in an era of unprecedented options, endless career paths, products, and lifestyles, but this abundance of choice can lead to decision fatigue and dissatisfaction. Psychologists have found that too many options often make people feel less satisfied with their choices, as they constantly wonder if a better option was left behind. In this way, the pursuit of unlimited freedom can paradoxically make us feel trapped, uncertain, and unfulfilled. Cultural and historical contexts further complicate the paradox. In many societies, freedom has been framed as liberation from oppression, whether political, economic, or social. Yet even in the pursuit of liberation, new structures of power and control often emerge. Revolutions that overthrow tyrannical regimes sometimes replace them with equally oppressive systems, revealing that the pursuit of freedom is fraught with unintended consequences. The desire for freedom can lead to its very erosion on a more personal level. The paradox of freedom plays out in our relationships with ourselves. We often think of freedom as doing whatever we want, but sometimes what we want in the moment conflicts with our long-term goals. Discipline and self-restraint might feel like limitations, but they're often what enable us to achieve meaningful freedom. Over time, a musician who practices for hours every day may sacrifice leisure, but that discipline allows them the freedom to express themselves fully through their art. Similarly, choosing to adhere to certain principles or calm commitments can provide a sense of purpose that unrestrained freedom cannot. The paradox also challenges how we view progress. Technological advancements often promise greater freedom to communicate, travel, and access information. Yet these same technologies can become tools of surveillance, distraction, or dependence. Social media, for instance, offers freedom of expression, but can also trap us in echo chambers or addictive behaviors. The tools we create to liberate ourselves can become the very chains that bind us. Ultimately, the paradox of freedom forces us to confront the complexity of human existence. Freedom is not about the absence of constraints, but about finding balance within them. It is about recognizing that boundaries and responsibilities are not the enemies of freedom, but its foundation. True freedom is not infinite choice or unrestrained action. It is the ability to live in alignment with our values, to navigate life's constraints with purpose, and to find meaning in the delicate balance between autonomy and connection. The paradox of freedom is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be embraced. It challenges us to think deeply about what we value, how we live, and what it truly means to be free. Far from diminishing freedom, this paradox enriches it, reminding us that the most profound forms of liberty come not from escaping limitations, but from understanding and working within them. Quietism. What if the best way to solve the problems of life is to stop trying to solve them altogether? This is the provocative idea at the heart of quietism, a philosophy that encourages us to let go of the struggle for answers and accept life as it is. Quietism isn't about resignation or defeat. It's about stepping back from the endless noise of human ambition and finding peace in simplicity and stillness. To understand quietism, imagine a person standing in a river fighting against the current. They expend all their energy struggling to move forward, only to stay in the same place or be swept backward. Quietism suggests that instead of resisting the flow of the river, we should surrender to it, allowing ourselves to be carried along. This doesn't mean giving up. It means recognizing the futility of certain struggles and choosing a path of harmony instead. The origins of quietism can be traced to various philosophical and spiritual traditions. In Western philosophy, it is often associated with figures like Pyrrho, the ancient Greek philosopher who founded skepticism. Pyrrho believed that certainty about life's big questions is impossible, and that striving for such certainty only leads to anxiety and frustration. His solution was to embrace a state of suspension where one refrains from making definitive judgments and instead approaches life with equanimity and openness. For Pyrrho, this state of detachment was the key to achieving inner peace. In early modern Europe, quietism took on a spiritual dimension with the work of thinkers like Miguel de Molinos, a Spanish priest who advocated for a contemplative life focused on surrender to the divine. Molinos argued that the soul finds true peace not through effort or action, but through complete stillness, and trust in God. This version of quietism emphasized the futility of human striving in the face of divine will and called for a radical acceptance of life circumstances. Quietism is not limited to Western traditions. In many ways, it resonates with Eastern philosophies, such as Taoism and Zen Buddhism. The Taoist concept of woe, or effortless action, aligns closely with the quietist idea of non-striving. Similarly, Zen teachings often emphasize the importance of letting go of attachment and embracing the present moment as it is. While these traditions have distinct cultural and historical contexts, they share a common thread: the belief that peace comes not from control or achievement, but from surrender and acceptance. One of the central challenges of quietism is its apparent passivity. Critics argue that it can be an excuse for inaction or a way to avoid responsibility. If we simply accept life as it is, aren't we turning a blind eye to suffering and injustice? Quietists would counter that their philosophy is not about indifference but about perspective. They suggest that much of our suffering comes not from the world itself, but from our attempts to impose our will on it. By stepping back, we can see things more clearly and act with wisdom and compassion rather than being driven by ego or desperation. In the realm of philosophy, Ludwig Wittgenstein's later work reflects a quietist approach. Wittgenstein argued that many philosophical problems arise from the misuse of language, and that once we understand this, the problems dissolve on their own. He famously wrote, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent." For Wittgenstein, the role of philosophy was not to provide solutions, but to show the limits of our understanding and help us find peace within those limits. Quietism also has implications for how we approach personal and societal challenges in a world obsessed with productivity, progress, and self-improvement. Quietism offers a countercultural perspective. It invites us to question whether our relentless pursuit of more success, more knowledge, more control is truly making us happier, or whether it is simply creating more stress and dissatisfaction. By stepping back from the constant cycle of striving, we may discover a deeper sense of contentment and clarity. Despite its emphasis on stillness and acceptance, quietism is not a one-size-fits-all philosophy. It requires careful reflection, tie-in, and balance. For some, it may be a way to navigate the existential uncertainties of life. For others, it may serve as a reminder to slow down and focus on what truly matters. In either case, quietism challenges us to rethink our relationship with action and inaction, with control and surrender. Ultimately, quietism is a philosophy of simplicity. It doesn't promise easy answers or quick fixes. Instead, it offers a profound shift in perspective, a way to find peace not by changing the world, but by changing how we engage with it. In a noisy and chaotic world, quietism invites us to embrace silence, stillness, and the quiet power of letting go. It reminds us that sometimes the most profound truths are found not in striving for more, but in learning to be content with less. The death drive. Why do we sabotage ourselves? Why do we sometimes choose chaos over order, destruction over survival? Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, believed he had an answer. The death drive. Beneath our conscious minds lies a dark and primal force, a pull not toward life, but toward self-destruction and the return to nothingness. In his 1920 work, Beyond the Pleasure Principle, Freud introduced the death drive, or thanatos. Until then, Freud had focused on the pleasure principle, the idea that humans seek pleasure and avoid pain. But he noticed something perplexing: not all behavior aligns with this instinct. People engage in self-sabotage, repeat harmful patterns, and gravitate towards suffering. Why? Freud argued that alongside our drive to live, there is an opposing force pulling us toward destruction. At its heart, the death drive reflects a desire to return to a state of non-existence, a primordial stillness before life began. Freud described it as an urge inherent in organic life to restore an earlier state of things. It manifests in decay, risky behaviors, and the self-destructive tendencies that plague individuals and societies alike. Ironic process theory. Don't think about a white bear. Whatever you do, don't picture at odds of the first thing that popped into your head was a white bear. This paradox is the essence of ironic process theory, a concept introduced by Daniel Vanner in the 1980s. It reveals a quirk of the mind. The more we try to suppress a thought, the more likely it is to. And true, but why? Does this happen when we suppress a thought? The mind splits into two processes. The first actively tries to push the thought away. Don't think about the white bear. The second, unconscious process, scans for the thought to ensure it doesn't slip through. Ironically, this monitoring keeps the thought alive, ready to resurface. Vanner proved this in experiments where participants were told not to think about a white bear. The harder they try, the more often the thought appeared. This isn't just a mental quirk. It has real-world implications. Insomnia sufferers who try to suppress worry often find themselves wide awake. People on diets fixate on forbidden foods. Breakups linger because trying to forget an ex only makes them more prominent. Vanner offered a solution: distraction. Redirecting the mind to another focus, like thinking about a black cat, can reduce the intrusive thoughts' power. Letting thoughts pass rather than fighting them also helps much. Like watching clouds drift in the sky. The lesson: suppression fuels obsession. Instead of wrestling with your mind, let the thought come and go, because like a stubborn white bear, overthrew it, the stronger it becomes. The problem of other minds: how do you know anyone else is conscious, not just alive, but truly aware, thinking, feeling, and experiencing the world like you do your best friend, your family, even strangers on the street? What if they're merely mimicking human behavior without any inner awareness? This is the problem of other minds, a haunting question in philosophy with no definitive answer. The problem stems from the subjective nature of consciousness. You know you're conscious because you experience your own thoughts and emotions, but when it comes to others, you only observe their behavior. A smile might suggest happiness, or tears might indicate sadness. But are these signs of inner experience or just outward displays? How can you rule out the possibility that others are philosophical zombies, entities that act conscious but lack true awareness? René Descartes famously declared, "I think, therefore I am," proving his own consciousness, but he couldn't extend that certainty to others, leaving their minds an open question. Modern neuroscience maps brain activity and correlates it with thoughts and feelings, but even this doesn't access the subjective experience of another person. We can measure the brain's mechanisms, but not its inner reality. Here's the unsettling twist: just as you can't prove others are conscious, no one can prove you are from their perspective. You might be the automaton going through the motions without awareness. This question challenges everything: our morality, relationships, and empathy, yet we act as if others are conscious because the alternative is unbearable. A world where your mind is the only reality. Theological suffering. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect. If there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. This observation from Richard Dawkins captures the essence of dialectical suffering: the belief that pain exists without meaning, purpose, or redemption. Nature is indifferent to suffering. Predators hunt prey, suffers, and parasites thrive, all as a consequence of survival, not morality or design. Suffering in this view isn't a test or lesson. It's simply a byproduct of life's relentless processes. There's no cosmic plan, no higher goal to explain the pain that pervades existence. The term discology combines the Greek telos, meaning end, or purpose, with dis, implying something flawed or misaligned. It rejects comforting narratives that suffering serves a greater good, revealing a world driven by chaos and competition rather than divine order. Hell is as other people. Hell isn't where you go, it's who you're with. Jean-Paul Sartre's idea, hell is other people, reveals a profound truth about human relationships. For Sartre, the essence of torment lies in being trapped under the gaze of others. Human existence is shaped by how we are seen and judged, forcing us to view ourselves through their perceptions rather than as we truly are. Picture yourself standing in front of a funhouse mirror that distorts your reflection. No matter how you adjust or try to explain what you really look like, the reflection defines you in the eyes of everyone watching. Sartre argued that this is what it feels like to exist in the presence of others. Every glance, every judgment imposes a version of you that may not align with your true self. This dynamic isn't just an occasional discomfort, it's a fundamental part of human existence. The need for validation locks us in a cycle where we crave recognition even though it limits our authenticity. SRA believe that the gaze of others turns us into objects, stripping away the freedom to define ourselves independently. Human relationships, even at their best, carry this inherent tension. The mere presence of others creates an invisible web of expectations and judgments, trapping us in roles we never fully choose. For Sartre, this unresolved verbal conflict defines the human condition, a constant pull between the desire to be seen and the inevitable loss of freedom that comes with it. Fallenness of Dasein, we spend our lives scrolling, chasing fleeting pleasures, and following routines. But is this truly living? Martin Heidegger called this the fallenness of Dar, revealing an unsettling truth about human existence. Much of what we do is a distraction from facing who we really are and being. Time Heidegger introduces the concept of Dasein, meaning being there, or existence. Darin represents the human condition, our unique capacity to question life and seek meaning. Yet instead of confronting these profound questions, we fall into what Heidegger termed fallenness, a passive absorption in the trivial and superficial. Fallenness isn't about morality, it's an existential state. Heidegger describes it as being lost into letting societal norms and expectations dictate our lives. We conform to what they think, say, and do, losing touch with our authentic selves. We curate perfect online personas, chase trends without questioning their value, and fill our days with distractions to avoid facing deeper truths. At its core, fallenness is a flight from anxiety. For Heidegger, anxiety isn't mere fear, it's the unsettling awareness of our freedom to shape life without a predetermined purpose. This realization exposes the void at the heart of existence. Instead of embracing this freedom, we retreat into routine and convention, avoiding the discomfort of authenticity. But anxiety, paradoxically, can liberate us. Heidegger believed it could jolt us out of fallenness, forcing us to confront our finitude and take responsibility for our choices. Authenticity lies not in rejecting society, but in consciously defining our own purpose. Misanthropy. In philosophy, humanity is flawed, perhaps so flawed that some philosophers have questioned whether it deserves its place in the world. Misanthropy, or the distrust and critique of humanity, has long been a theme in philosophy, challenging our understanding of ourselves, our values, and our impact on the world. It is not about hating individual people, but about questioning the collective nature of humanity, its tendencies, choices, and the consequences of its actions. Philosophical misanthropy is not simply cynicism or bitterness. It is a serious critique of human nature. It examines the ways in which humanity falls short of its ideals, often focusing on the harm we inflict on ourselves, others, and the planet. For thinkers like Arthur Schopenhauer, misanthropy stemmed from a deep skepticism about human behavior. Schopenhauer saw humanity as driven by the will to live, a blind, insatiable force that leads to constant striving, competition, and suffering. He argued that human beings, far from being rational or virtuous, are largely governed by selfishness and irrational desires. Friedrich Nietzsche, another pivotal figure, approached misanthropy differently. While criticized humanity for its mentality and its tendency to cling to comfort and mediocrity, he did not reject humanity outright. Instead, he saw these flaws as challenges to overcome. Misanthropy was not a dismissal of humanity, but a call for transformation, a demand that we confront our limitations and strive to become better versions of ourselves. Philosophical misanthropy often emerges from a sense of disappointment. The ancient Greek philosopher Diogenes of Cop, a key figure in cynicism, is remembered for his sharp critiques of human hypocrisy and vanity. He is said to have wandered the streets with a lantern searching for an honest man. Diogenes rejected the social conventions and materialism of his time, believing that humanity's pursuit of wealth, power, and status had corrupted its moral character. His misanthropy wasn't rooted in hatred, but in frustration with humanity's failure to live authentically and virtuously. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a more hopeful thinker, also expressed misanthropic ideas in his critique of civilization. Rousseau believed that humanity was inherently good in its natural state, but had been corrupted by society. He argued that the pursuit of progress and modernity had alienated people from their true nature, leading to inequality, greed, and moral decay, while Rousseau's misanthropy was directed at the collective flaws of civilization. It carried an underlying belief in the possibility of redemption. Through a return to simplicity and connection with nature, modern misanthropic philosophy often focuses on humanity's impact on the planet. Environmental philosophers like Arnce and thinkers associated with the deep ecology movement argue that humanity's exploitation of nature reflects a dangerous anthropocentrism. This perspective sees humanity as a destructive force, prioritizing its own interests at the expense of other species and ecosystems. While not all environmentalists are misanthropes, this critique of humanity's role in ecological crisis aligns with misanthropy's broader distrust of human behavior. Misanthropy can also take an existential turn, questioning whether humanity's existence has any inherent value. Emile Corinne, a 20th century philosopher, wrote extensively about the absurdity and futility of human life. For Corinne, humanity's relentless pursuit of meaning often masked its deeper flaws, its arrogance, destructiveness, and inability to confront its limitations. Yet Soren's work also reveals a dark humor and a recognition of the resilience and contradictions of the human condition. Critics of philosophical misanthropy often argue that it is overly harsh or dismissive of humanity's potential. They point to acts of kindness, creativity, and progress as evidence that humanity is capable of greatness, while misanthropy highlights humanity's failures. It risks overlooking its capacity for compassion, innovation, and resilience. However, many misanthropic philosophers would counter that their critique is not an absolute condemnation, but an attempt to confront uncomfortable truths. By acknowledging humanity's flaws, they argue, we can begin to address them. One of the most challenging aspects of misanthropy is its moral implications. If humanity is fundamentally flawed, what should we do about it? Should we strive to change, or should we accept our limitations? Philosophers like Ntia saw misanthropy as a call to action, urging humanity to overcome its weaknesses and embrace its potential. Others like Schopenhauer lean toward resignation, viewing the flaws of humanity as inherent and unchangeable. Philosophical misanthropy forces us to grapple with difficult questions about our nature and our future. Are our flaws a product of circumstance, or are they inherent to who we are? Can we rise above our tendencies towards selfishness, violence, and destruction, or are these traits inseparable from our humanity? These questions are not easy to answer, but they are vital for understanding the human condition. Ultimately, misanthropy in philosophy is not about rejecting humanity, but about holding a mirror to it. It asks us to confront our failures, question our assumptions, and rethink what it means to be human, whether it leads to despair, hope, or transformation. Philosophical misanthropy challenges us to take a hard look at ourselves and consider how we can do better in doing so. It invites us not to turn away from humanity, but to engage with it more honestly and thoughtfully than ever before. Radical skepticism. Are you certain the world around you is real? What if everything, your thoughts, memories, and even your sense of self, is an illusion? This unsettling idea lies at the core of radical skepticism, a philosophy that asks, how do you know anything at all? Radical skepticism challenges the foundations of certainty itself. René Descartes, the 17th century philosopher, confronted this head-on. He doubted everything: his senses, the world, even his own body. I shall suppose, he wrote, that some malicious demon has employed all his energies to deceive me. Even the simplest truths, like the existence of the external world, could be questioned in this search for absolute certainty. Descartes found one unshakable realization: cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I, in the very act of doubting, prove his existence as a thinking being. Yet this was a lonely certainty. everything beyond his thoughts remains suspect. David Hume took this skepticism further. He argued that our minds are merely a bundle of fleeting perceptions stitched together by habit, not logic. He even questioned causality itself. How do we know one event causes another? For Hume, our assumptions about the world, like the sun rising tomorrow, are based on probabilities, not guarantees. Radical skepticism isn't confined to philosophy books. Every time you misremember something or mistake a dream for reality, you step into its unsettling world. It offers no comforting answers, only the truth that certainty is elusive. The more we probe reality, the more it dissolves. So, the next time you feel sure about something, pause, question. You may find less certainty than you imagined. Ism life is a mistake, not just human life, but all life. The predator hunting its prey, the insect devoured by a larger beast, the endless cycle of birth, suffering, and death. Ism, a radical philosophy, doesn't just question human existence, it questions the very fabric of life itself. It asks us to consider an unsettling idea. What if the kindest, most ethical act isn't to sustain life, but to end it? Imagine a factory that's been running for billions of years. It churns out living beings endlessly, each one programmed to fight for survival, experience suffering, and inevitably die. This factory isn't guided by intelligence or purpose. It runs blindly, its only goal being the replication of DNA. This is the process of evolution, the engine of life. Epictetus argue that this machine is fundamentally broken, and worse, it is cruel. Life, they claim, is a mindless system that perpetuates suffering for no higher reason. To understand this, let's look at nature. Picture a lion chasing a zebra. To survive, the lion must kill and eat the zebra. The zebra, desperate to live, flees in terror. But neither animal chose this game. The lion hunts out of hunger, and the zebra runs out of fear. The suffering of one is the survival of the other. Nature's so-called balance is at its core a bloodbath. Epictetus see this as not just a tragedy, but as evidence that life itself is inherently flawed. But Epictetus and our struggles are unending. For every moment of happiness, there are countless moments of frustration, loss, and despair. And this isn't just true for humans. Every sentient being, from the smallest insect to the largest mammal, is caught in the same trap. Epictetus' argument is simple yet profound. Evolution, the process that brought life into existence, doesn't care about the well-being of the creatures it creates. Its only purpose is to ensure survival and reproduction, no matter the cost. In this sense, life is not a miracle or a gift. It is a relentless cycle of need, pain, and eventual death. Epictetus believe that continuing this cycle is not just pointless, but ethically wrong. Now imagine you're holding a switch. If you flip it, all life in the universe would painlessly cease to exist. No more suffering, no more fear, no more endless struggle. Would you do it? This thought experiment captures the essence of Ism. It is not a philosophy born of hatred for life, but of compassion for all living beings trapped in its cycle. Epictetus argue that true kindness lies in ending suffering altogether, even if that means extinguishing life itself. Critics of Epictetus, but Epictetus counter that their perspective is rooted in logic and empathy. They ask, if you wouldn't willingly subject someone to endless pain and hardship, why would you allow the continuation of a system that guarantees suffering for countless beings? For Fist, the solution is clear: to stop the factory, to end the machine, to bring life's cruel experiment to a close. It's a perspective that shocks, provokes, and challenges the very foundations of how we view existence. Ism doesn't provide easy answers or comforting truths. Instead, it forces us to confront life's harshest realities and ask ourselves an impossible question: is existence worth the cost? Voluntary human extinction movement. Picture a world without humans, no pollution, no deforestation, no species driven to extinction by human activity. This is the vision of the voluntary human extinction movement, a provocative and deeply controversial ideology that proposes a simple but radical solution to humanity's environmental impact: that humans should voluntarily stop reproducing and allow our species to fade into extinction. 4. The benefit of the planet and all other forms of life. The voluntary human extinction movement is not about hatred of humanity, or advocating harm at its core, it is rooted in compassion for the planet, for future generations, and for the countless species whose existence is threatened by human activity. Its founder, Lao Tzu, articulated the movement's philosophy. As one of voluntary action, he argues that humanity's dominance over the earth has caused unparalleled harm, and the most ethical response is to step aside, allowing the natural world to heal and thrive. Without us, the movement asks us to confront uncomfortable truths about humanity's impact. As a species, we have reshaped ecosystems, altered the climate, and driven countless species to extinction. Every year, vast tracts of forests are cleared for agriculture, oceans are polluted with plastic, and the atmosphere is filled with greenhouse gases. The voluntary human extinction movement suggests that these issues are not just byproducts of mismanagement or inefficiency, but inherent to the existence of a species as dominant and resource-intensive as humanity. Supporters of the movement argue that even the most sustainable human practices come at a cost to other life forms, while efforts to reduce our footprint through renewable energy conservation and sustainable agriculture are vital. They contend that these measures are insufficient to address the deeper issue: humanity's sheer scale and consumption. For them, voluntary extinction is not a statement of despair, but an act of altruism, a way to prioritize the needs of the planet over the perpetuation of a single species. Critics of the voluntary human extinction movement raise several objections. One of the most common is that it dismisses humanity's capacity for positive change. Humans, after all, are not only destructive, but also creative and compassionate. We have developed technologies that can restore damaged ecosystems, discovered ways to mitigate climate change, and advocated for the rights of other species. Critics argue that instead of disappearing, humanity should focus on becoming better stewards of the earth, finding ways to coexist harmoniously with other life forms. Another critique is the philosophical question of whether extinction is inherently better for the planet. Without humans, the natural world would undoubtedly recover, but the cycle of life would still involve suffering. Predation, disease, and competition are fundamental aspects of ecosystems. The absence of humans might alleviate certain pressures, but it would not eliminate pain and struggle from the natural world. The movement also sparks ethical questions about how humanity values itself. Is it possible to promote voluntary extinction without diminishing the inherent worth of human life? Supporters of the movement believe it is emphasizing that their philosophy is not about misanthropy or self-hatred, but about recognizing humanity's unique position of responsibility by choosing not to reproduce. They argue, we acknowledge the power we hold over the planet and make a conscious decision to reduce harm. The voluntary human extinction movement forces us to think deeply about the nature of progress and our place in the world. It challenges the assumption that growth, whether economic, technological, or population-based, is inherently good. Instead, it asks whether true progress might lie in restraint, in stepping back to allow other forms of life to flourish. This perspective shifts the focus from human-centric narratives of achievement to a broader view of the planet as a shared home. While the movement's ultimate goal may seem extreme or unrealistic, its underlying message resonates with many who are concerned about the state of the environment. It highlights the urgency of addressing humanity's impact and sparks important conversations about sustainability, ethics, and the future of life on Earth. Whether or not one agrees with the idea of voluntary extinction, the movement serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked human activity and the moral responsibility that comes with being the dominant species. The voluntary human extinction movement does not seek to impose its philosophy on others. Instead, it invites reflection on the long-term implications of our choices as individuals and as a species. In doing so, it challenges us to confront not only the environmental crisis, but also the values and assumptions that shape how we live. The idea may be unsettling, but its purpose is to provoke thought, encouraging us to imagine a world where humanity's legacy is one of compassion, not destruction. Whether humanity chooses to adapt, change, or fade away, the questions raised by the voluntary human extinction movement will remain relevant as we navigate the complex relationship between progress and preservation determinism. Every decision you've ever made, what you ate for breakfast, who you've become, might not have been a choice at all. Determinism argues that every action, thought, and event is the inevitable result of prior causes, making freedom an illusion. The idea dates back to ancient philosophy, but 18th century mathematician Pierre Simon Lasse captured its essence with his concept of Lasse's demon. This hypothetical intelligence, knowing the position and motion of every particle in the universe, could predict the future with absolute certainty. For such an intellect, Lasse wrote, nothing would be uncertain, and the future, like the past, will be present before its eyes. Determinism rests on cause and effect. From atomic movements to neural firings, every action is bound by prior events. If time were rewound, every thought and action would unfold exactly the same way as they were never truly under your control. The meaning of suffering. Suffering is inevitable. It touches every life in every corner of the world, leaving no one untouched. But why does it exist? Is it merely a cruel accident of life? Or does it serve a deeper purpose? The question of the meaning of suffering has haunted humanity for millennia, inspiring some of our most profound philosophies, religions, and works of art. At its core, suffering raises questions about existence itself. Why must living beings endure pain, loss, and despair? For many, suffering seems to undermine the very idea of a just or meaningful universe, and yet some argue that suffering is not just an unfortunate byproduct of existence, but a force that shapes us, challenges us, and paradoxically gives life depth and meaning. One of the most influential perspectives on suffering comes from the ancient Greek philosopher Epictetus, who saw pain as an unavoidable part of the human experience. He argued that understanding the nature of suffering could help us manage it. For Epictetus, much of our suffering comes from fear of death, fear of pain, fear of the unknown. By confronting these fears head-on and recognizing their limits, we can reduce the hold they have over us. This isn't to say we eliminate suffering entirely, but we learn to navigate it with greater clarity. Religious traditions also provide powerful interpretations of suffering. In Christianity, suffering is often seen as a test of faith or a path to redemption. The story of Job, for example, explores the endurance of a man who loses everything yet continues to trust in God. Through his trials, Job's suffering becomes a means of deepening his relationship with the divine, even if the reasons for his pain remain incomprehensible. This perspective doesn't necessarily explain suffering, but it reframes it as something that can transform and elevate the human spirit. In Buddhism, suffering is placed at the center of its teachings. The first noble truth states that life is marked by suffering or dukkha, caused by desire and attachment. This suffering is not seen as punishment, but as a natural consequence of craving permanence in an impermanent world. The Buddha's path to enlightenment offers a way to transcend suffering, not by avoiding it, but by understanding its roots and learning to let go. This approach views suffering as a teacher, guiding us toward insight and liberation. For existentialist philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche, suffering is an essential part of growth and self-discovery. Nietzsche famously declared that which does not kill us makes us stronger. He believed that suffering was not to be avoided, but embraced as a source of strength and creativity. Life's greatest challenges, he argued, force us to confront our limitations and push beyond them, transforming pain into power. To Nietzsche, suffering was not just a condition to endure, but a force that could fuel human greatness. But not everyone agrees that suffering has meaning. For many nihilists, suffering is simply a fact of life, random, meaningless, and indifferent. It has no deeper purpose, no justification. This perspective can be both freeing and unsettling. On the one hand, it absolves us of the need to find meaning in our pain. On the other, it leaves us with the daunting task of facing suffering without the comfort of larger narratives. Nihilism challenges us to create our own meaning in a universe that offers none. Modern psychology offers yet another perspective, focusing on how humans process and respond to suffering. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist wrote extensively about the meaning of suffering in his book Man's Search for Meaning. Drawing on his experiences in concentration camps, Frankl argued that while we cannot always control the suffering we endure, we can choose how we respond to it. For Frankl, the ability to find meaning even in the darkest circumstances is what defines humanity. He saw suffering as an opportunity to rise above our circumstances and affirm the value of life. Science, too, sheds light on the nature of suffering, particularly its role in evolution. Pain serves as a survival mechanism, warning us of danger and helping us avoid harm. Emotional suffering, such as grief or loneliness, strengthens social bonds and promotes cooperation, which are essential for the survival of social species. While these explanations don't offer moral or philosophical meaning, they reveal suffering as an integral part of life's design, shaping the way we interact with the world and each other in the modern world, where suffering often feels overwhelming. Wars, pandemics, environmental crisis, it's easy to see it as an insurmountable burden, yet some argue that suffering can inspire acts of compassion and solidarity. In moments of collective hardship, people often come together to support one another, finding strength and meaning in shared humanity. This doesn't erase the pain, but transforms it into something that connects and uplifts. Suffering forces us to ask difficult questions. It challenges our assumptions, tests our resilience, and compels us to confront the fragility of life. Whether we find meaning in it or not, suffering remains one of the most profound and universal aspects of existence. It is a mirror reflecting our vulnerability and a crucible in which our character is forged. Ultimately, the meaning of suffering is deeply personal. For some, it is a source of spiritual growth. For others, it is a reminder of life's harsh indifference. And for many, it is simply an undeniable fact of existence that must be faced and endured. What unites all these perspectives is the recognition that suffering, though painful, is an integral part of being alive. In understanding it, we come closer to understanding ourselves and the complex, fragile, and extraordinary experience of life. State of nature. As wars strip away laws, governments, and societal rules, what's left, for philosopher Thomas Hobbes, it's chaos of brutal war of every man against every man. This is the state of nature, a world without authority, which Hobbes saw as humanity's raw, unfiltered reality. In his 1651 work, Leviathan, Hobbes argued that life in the state of nature would be driven by fear and competition. Humans, motivated by self-interest and survival, would clash endlessly over resources and power. In such condition, he wrote, the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Why such chaos? Hobbes pointed to equality, not the noble kind, but the kind that makes everyone equally dangerous. Even the weakest can harm the strongest through cunning or alliances, creating perpetual mistrust without rules or authority to ensure safety. People would live in constant suspicion, ready to strike first. This isn't just theory. Hobbes pointed to civil wars and societal breakdowns as glimpses of the state of nature, yet he didn't see humans as evil, just rational. In a world without order, survival demands preemptive conflict. Hobbes believed the only escape was the social contract, individuals surrendering some freedom to a sovereign authority, the Leviathan, in exchange for security and peace. This authority, wielding absolute power, keeps the chaos of the state of nature at bay. While critics argue Hobbes underestimated human cooperation, his vision resonates today. From political instability to international tensions, the shadow of the state of nature reminds us what's at stake. Hobbes challenges us to ask what truly holds civilization together, and how far are we willing to go to preserve it. Terror management theory. Every decision you make, every belief you hold might be shaped by one thing: the fear of death. Terror management theory reveals how the awareness of our morality influences thoughts, actions, and even society itself. Developed by psychologist Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Pasinski in the 1980s, the theory builds on Ernest Becker's The Denial of Death. Becker argued that humans, uniquely aware of their mortality, face an existential terror that could paralyze us to cope, we create systems of meaning, religion, art, nationalism that give life purpose and connect us to something greater. These cultural worldviews shield us from the unsettling reality of our impermanence. But this defense comes with a cost. When our worldviews are challenged, our fear of death resurfaces. Research shows that subtle reminders of mortality, what psychologists call mortality salience, can profoundly shape behavior. People become more defensive of their cultural values, resistant to opposing ideas, and even hostile toward those who threaten their beliefs. In one study, participants reminded of death were more likely to support charismatic leaders, promising strength and stability. This fear doesn't just shape individuals, it defines societies. Our monuments, traditions, and rituals aren't just cultural artifacts, they're defenses against death's shadow, anchoring us to a sense of permanence. Cow sway. What if something could create itself, exist without any external cause? This is ka sway, the idea of being one's own cause. It challenges logic, forcing us to rethink the very nature of existence. The concept originates with Baruch Spinoza, who used it to describe God, or as he called it, substance. In Ethics, Spinoza wrote, "That thing is called free, which exists from the necessity of its own nature alone, and is determined to act by itself alone." For Spinoza, God, or the universe, is ca sway, self-caused, infinite, and dependent on nothing else. This idea defies how we understand causality. Everything relies on something else, a tree from a seed from another tree. But where does the chain begin? Spinoza's answer is radical, with something that simply exists, needing no cause, because it is the cause. Cow sway also resonates in existential philosophy. Thinkers like Sartre explored the human desire to be self-created. Sartre called it the project of being God, the longing to define ourselves without external influence. While humans can't truly be kojui, the struggle to define ourselves shapes our existence. In science, echoes of Cow sway emerge in questions about the universe's origin. If everything has a cause, what caused the universe? Could it create itself, or does it require an external first cause? For Spinoza, the universe doesn't need a reason to exist. It simply does. This idea isn't about escaping causality, but understanding it. Causes sway forces us to confront a paradox. Can anything truly cause itself? Or is it a reflection of our longing to escape the web of causes that define us? Life is a cosmic accident. Life wasn't planned, it wasn't designed, it wasn't inevitable. It's the result of a cosmic accident, an extraordinary chain of events in an indif universe that just happened to align in the right way. From the formation of the first atoms to the emergence of consciousness, every step of life's journey is marked by randomness and improbability. The question is what does this realization mean for how we see ourselves, our purpose, and the nature of existence itself? To understand life as a cosmic accident, we have to look at its origins. Around 138 billion years ago, the Big Bang marked the beginning of the universe. From an unimaginably small and hot point space-time, and matter began to unfold. In these early moments, chaos reigned, particles collided, energy flowed, and over time atoms formed. Eventually gravity began to pull these atoms together, creating stars and galaxies. This process was not directed or purposeful. It was driven by the laws of physics and the blind forces of nature within the swirling chaos of a universe. One star, a relatively ordinary star in a relatively ordinary galaxy, formed about 46 billion years ago. Around it, debris left over from its creation coalesced into planets. On one of these planets, Earth, a unique set of conditions came together: a stable orbit, a protective atmosphere, and a temperature range that allowed liquid water to exist. Again, there was no intention behind this. It was a convergence of chance and physics, a cosmic lottery that Earth happened to win. Life began in the oceans, likely as simple organic molecules formed and interacted under specific conditions. These molecules eventually gave rise to self-replicating structures. The first primitive forms of life from their evolution took over a process that itself is based on randomness. Mutations occur by chance, and only those that offer some survival advantage persist over billions of years. This process led to the incredible diversity of life we see today, including us, conscious beings capable of reflecting on our own existence But here's the catch: none of this had to happen if the Big Bang had been slightly different, if the Earth's orbit were slightly closer to or farther from the Sun. If a single mutation in our evolutionary history hadn't occurred, we wouldn't be here. The conditions that allowed for life, and especially intelligent life, are so improbable that they can feel almost most miraculous, yet there is no evidence to suggest that any guiding force or higher purpose was involved. It's all the result of natural processes and countless coincidences. This realization can be both awe-inspiring and unsettling. On the one hand, it underscores how extraordinary our existence is. The odds of life arising, let alone intelligent life, capable of contemplating its own origins, are astronomically low. On the other hand, it suggests that we are not central to the universe's story. The cosmos existed for billions of years before us, and will continue for billions more after we're gone. Our lives, our struggles, and even our civilizations are fleeting in the grand scheme of things. For some, this perspective raises questions about meaning. If life is an accident, does that mean it's meaningless? If the universe is indifferent to our existence, does that make everything we do pointless? These are deeply personal questions, and different thinkers have approached them in different ways. For existentialist philosophers, the absence of inherent meaning is not a problem, but an opportunity. They argue that meaning is something we create, not something we are given. The fact that life has no predetermined purpose frees us to define our own. Scientists, too, find inspiration in the accidental nature of life, rather than diminishing its value. The randomness of existence highlights how remarkable it is. Carl Schwann, for example, famously described humans as star stuff, emphasizing that the elements in our bodies were forged in the hearts of dying stars. For Schwann, this connection to the cosmos was a source of wonder and humility. It reminded us that while we may be small, we are also deeply tied to the universe that created us. Life as a cosmic accident also challenges us to rethink our relationship with the world around us. If we are the result of chance, so is every other living thing. This perspective can foster a sense of kinship with all forms of life, from the tiniest microbe to the largest whale. It reminds us that we're not separate from nature, but a part of it, a fleeting expression of the same processes that created the stars and galaxies. At the same time, this view can make us more aware of our responsibility. Life on Earth is fragile, and its continued existence depends on choices we make as a species. Understanding how improbable and precious life is can motivate us to protect it, not because of any higher purpose, but because we recognize its intrinsic value. Ultimately, seeing life as a cosmic accident, it invites us to embrace uncertainty. It asks us to let go of the idea that the universe owes us answers or guarantees. Instead, it challenges us to find beauty and meaning in the randomness of existence. Our lives may not have been planned, but they are ours to live. And in a universe indifferent to our presence, the very act of living, of caring, of wondering becomes a profound expression of what it means to exist. The Bamel mind. What if human consciousness is far younger than we think? This is the bold idea behind the bicameral mind, a theory proposed by Julian James in his 1976 book, The Origin of Consciousness. In the breakdown of the Bamel mind, James argued that ancient humans, as recently as 3,000 years ago, were not conscious as we are today. Instead, their minds operated in two chambers, one giving commands and the other obeying, interpreting these commands as the voices of gods. James pointed to texts like the Iliad, where characters lack introspection and attribute decisions to divine voices. He believed these weren't metaphors, but literal experiences, with one brain hemisphere producing commands and the other hearing them. This Bamel mind provided clear, authoritative guidance essential for survival in chaotic early societies. Over time, societal complexity and the development of written language led to the breakdown of this system. As external pressures like wars and migrations increased, humans adapted, fostering introspection and the emergence of modern self-awareness. For James, this marked the birth of consciousness. As we know, critics call the theory speculative, questioning its neurological basis and reliance on textual interpretation. However, James's ideas provoke profound questions. Is modern consciousness a Relatively recent developments shaped by history, could it be more fragile and contingent than we assume? If consciousness once emerged from societal and environmental pressures, could it also fade under different conditions? James's theory forces us to consider whether our sense of self is an eternal human trait or a fleeting product of a particular moment in history. Beginning toward death, you're dying not someday far in the future, but right now. Each passing moment, each breath brings you closer to the end. This stark truth forms the foundation of Martin Heidegger's concept of being toward death. For Heidegger, death isn't just an event, it's the defining feature of existence, shaping how we live each day. Death is paradoxical, both absolutely certain and completely unknowable. Heidegger wrote, "As soon as man comes to life, he is at once old enough to die," emphasizing that death is always present part of who we are, yet its timing and nature remain a mystery, making it unlike any other experience. Most of us avoid this reality, losing ourselves in routines and social norms. What Heidegger called the self. In this passive state, we adopt the illusion of permanence, pretending death is distant and abstract. But Heidegger argued that this avoidance leads to inauthentic living. To live authentically, we must confront our mortality. Heidegger called this being toward death, actively acknowledging life's finite nature. By embracing death, we take responsibility for our lives. Decisions gain weight, and life becomes a series of deliberate choices rather than passive motions. For hiding this isn't despair. It's freedom. Understanding that time is limited makes it precious. You stop living for others or meaningless distractions and start living for yourself, fully aware of your finite existence. Death, he believed, is the ultimate individual experience. No one else can die your death for you. By facing this truth, you break free from illusions and live authentically, realizing that life's value lies in its impermanence and eternal form. Confronting death, he argued, can we truly live? Sadian nihilism. Morality is just an illusion. Nature doesn't care if you're good or evil, just or cruel. This is the stark foundation of Sadian nihilism, a philosophy rooted in the provocative works of the Mari Dada, whose ideas challenge the very essence of morality itself. At its core, Sadian nihilism denies the existence of universal moral truths. Dade argued that concepts like virtue and justice are human inventions imposed on an indifferent and amoral natural world. In his novel Justine, he declares nature has created us all solely to torment one another. For Dad, nature is driven purely by survival and desire, indifferent to human constructs of right and wrong. Dade's view of humanity reflects this brutal indifference. He saw people as creatures governed by raw impulses rather than reason or ethics. If morality is nothing more than a human fabrication, he concluded, there is no obligation to adhere to its rules. In the philosophy in the bedroom, he claimed that true freedom lies in embracing natural desires, no matter how transgressive or destructive. Bundle theory of the self. Who are you? Is there a core you beneath your thoughts and experiences? Philosopher David Hume thought not in his treatise of human nature. Hume introduced the bundle theory of the self, a revolutionary idea that challenges our sense of identity. Hume argued that when we look inward, we don't find a singular, unchanging self. Instead, we encounter a constantly shifting stream of perceptions, sensations, thoughts, and emotions. He wrote, when I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble on some particular perception. I never can catch myself at any time without a perception and never can observe anything. But the perception, according to Hume, the self is not a unified entity, but a bundle, a collection of experiences loosely connected like beads on a string, except there is no string. The self is merely the sum of its parts, an illusion created by the mind's need for continuity. Imagine a movie reel. The frames blur together to create the illusion of motion, but pause it, and you see individual disconnected images. Hume suggested our sense of self operates the same way, a mental construct, not a constant truth. This challenges concepts like identity, responsibility, and morality. If there's no core self who is accountable for our actions, critics like Immanuel Kant argued that all organizing perceptions requires a stable self. Others point to memory and narrative as creating continuity yet. Modern neuroscience supports Hume's studies reveal the brain as a patchwork of systems. Working in parallel with no central coordinator, the self, it seems as a process, not a thing. Hume's theory leaves us with a liberating thought. If we're a bundle of experiences, we're free to grow and redefine ourselves. With every passing moment, human sacrifice mythos, few ideas are as unsettling as human sacrifice, the act of offering a life to appease God, seek favor, or restore balance. What drove civilizations across the globe to embrace such rituals? And what does this reveal about the human psyche? Human sacrifice spanned cultures and eras, from Aztec temples to Celtic druids, from ancient China to Mesopotamia. At its heart was the belief that blood was the ultimate currency in the cosmic economy. For the Aztecs, it wasn't just ritual, it was necessity. The gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world, and humanity owed a debt. Historian David Carrasco noted, without the nourishment of blood, the sun would fail to rise. Sacrifice ensured the universe's survival. But why humans, not animals or CRS? Life itself held sacred, unmatched value. Offering human life was the ultimate gift, imbued with profound spiritual weight. Philosopher René Girard explored the psychology of sacrifice, proposing it emerged to resolve social conflict. His scapegoat mechanism theory suggested societies channel collective guilt or fear onto a single victim, restoring unity. Sacrifice wasn't just spiritual, it reinforced political power. Priests and rulers claimed authority through their ability to mediate between humanity and the divine. Over time, and argued sacrifice evolved. Ritual bloodshed gave way to moral sacrifices, self-denial, and guilt shaped by religious systems like Christianity. Today, human sacrifice is gone, but its echoes persist in our stories, and the idea of sacrificing for greater causes, moral nihilism, good, evil, right, wrong. What if these weren't universal truths, but human inventions, stories we've created to impose order on a chaotic universe? This is the claim of moral nihilism, the belief that morality isn't real, but a construct of fiction we tell. Orselfus Jelon Mackey, one of moral nihilism key proponents, opens his book Ethics, Inventing Right and Wrong with a bold assertion: there are no OBI values. From Mackey, moral claims, justice, kindness, cruelty, aren't facts about the world. Instead, they projections of human emotions and social conventions, as unreal as shadows cast on a wall. Mackey supports this view with two arguments. The first is the argument from relativity across cultures. In history, moral codes differ wildly. One society's virtue is another's vice. If morality were truly objective, shouldn't we expect more consistency? Mackey suggests that these differences arise not from universal truths, but from human needs shaped by specific context. The second is the argument from queerness. If objective moral values existed, they'd be unlike anything else in the universe, strange metaphysical entities guiding human behavior. How could we even detect such things? From Mackey, this idea is implausible, further undermining the notion of objective morality. But moral nihilism doesn't demand chaos or lawlessness. Mackey describes morality as a useful fiction. Rules like stealing is wrong aren't cosmic truths, they're tools that promote social stability. The fiction works even if it's not real. If you really question your life, one thing becomes clear: most of it is suffering, hoping for just some moments of happiness. And yet, despite the endless torment, you continue living, driven by something that is beyond logic. The insatiable will to live. For Arthur Schopenhauer, this will was the fundamental force behind all existence. In the world as will and representation, he described it as a blind, relentless drive that compels every living being to survive, reproduce, and persist. It isn't rational, conscious, or purposeful. It simply, as Schopenhauer wrote, life is assured to the will to live. Therefore, it clings to it even in the most miserable conditions. But the will is not a source of joy. It is the root of suffering. Fulfill one desire, and another takes its place. Escape one pain, and a new one emerges. Schopenhauer argued that pleasure is fleeting, while suffering is constant. He wrote, all satisfaction is only negative, the removal of a desire, and pain, this struggle, is universal in nature. Life devours life in a cycle of survival. In human existence, ambition often leads to emptiness. Unlike animals, we reflect on our suffering, yet remain trapped by the will, amplifying our own misery. Moral desert. Do we truly deserve anything? The concept of moral desert questions whether people genuinely earn the rewards or punishments they receive. On the surface, it seems fair. Good actions deserve good outcomes, and bad actions deserve bad ones. But dig deeper, and this belief starts to unravel. Philosophers like John Rawls argue that much of what we consider deserved depends on factors beyond our control. In A Theory of Justice, Rawls points out that traits like intelligence, talents, and even moral character are shaped by luck, our upbringing, genetics, and environment. If these foundational aspects of who we are aren't chosen, how can we claim to deserve anything? For example, someone born into wealth may achieve success through hard work, but their opportunities were built on advantages they didn't earn. Conversely, someone born into poverty may struggle despite equal or greater effort. Moral desert assumes a level playing field, but life rarely provides one. Bernard Williams goes further, suggesting that morality shouldn't focus on rewarding or punishing individuals, but on creating systems that promote fairness and well-being. He sees deservingness as a distraction often used to justify inequality rather than address it. Determinism complicates things further. If our actions are shaped by prior causes, biology, environment, and experience, how much control do we really have? If free will is an illusion, can anyone truly deserve their fate? This debate has real-world implications. Meritocracies claim to reward effort, but if effort itself depends on unequal conditions, is this justice? And in criminal justice, punishment based on desert ignores systemic factors that shape behavior. Objection. Why does a rotting corpse horrify us so deeply? Why do we recoil from things that blur the boundaries between human and inhuman? These reactions stem from objection, a concept explored by Julia Kristeva in her book Powers of Horror. Objection isn't just fear or disgust. It's the psychological unease we feel when something disrupts the boundaries that define our sense of self. Kristeva explains that human identity relies on clear distinctions: self and other, life and death, clean and unclean. The object is anything that breaks these boundaries, forcing us to confront what we've repressed or excluded. Bodily fluids like blood or vomit unsettle us because they blur the line between inside and outside, reminding us of our physicality, vulnerability, and mortality. A corpse, once alive and now decaying, occupies a space between human and other. It confronts us with the reality of death, a reality we often work hard to ignore. Vanity of existence. Why do we strive and toil, knowing nothing lasts? This is the heart of Arthur Schopenhauer's concept of the vanity of existence, a stark reflection on the futility of life. For Schopenhauer, existence is a relentless cycle of striving, suffering, and inevitable decline. He wrote, the vanity of existence is revealed in the whole form existence assumes in the infiniteness of time and space, contrasted with the finiteness of the individual. In both, we are fleeting beings adrift in an infinite, uncaring cosmos. Schopenhauer argued that life is driven by the will to life, an insatiable force compelling us to survive, reproduce, and chase desires, yet every fulfilled desire only gives way to new ones. All satisfaction, he declared, is only negative, the removal of a desire, and its pain. This endless yearning mirrors Copus endlessly pushing his boulder uphill in daily life. This truth becomes evident. A new achievement, possession, or recognition provides fleeting joy, but the satisfaction dissolves, leaving us wanting again. Even acts of creation, love, or legacy, Schopenhauer saw as attempt to mask the void. Time erodes all achievements, even the grandest empires crumble. What has been and is no more, he wrote, always seems better than what is now. Schopenhauer didn't seek despair, but clarity. He believed recognizing life's futility allowed us to escape its grip through art, philosophy, and especially music, which offered moments of liberation from endless striving, existential loneliness. No matter how connected we are, how deeply we love, or how closely we bond, there is a part of us that remains Fundamentally alone, this is existential loneliness, the deep, pervasive sense of solitude that stems not from the absence of others, but from the nature of existence itself. It is the recognition that as individuals we are ultimately isolated in our inner experiences, carrying the weight of our existence. Existence alone, existential loneliness, is not about being physically alone. It's not the same as social isolation or the temporary feeling of missing someone. Instead, it's rooted in the realization that no one can fully understand or share the entirety of another person's inner world. No matter how well we articulate our thoughts or how closely we connect with someone, our subjective experiences remain uniquely ours. This inherent separateness is a condition of being human. Philosophers and writers have long grappled with this profound sense of isolation. Søren Kierkegaard, often regarded as the father of existentialism, spoke of the individual's relationship to existence as a solitary journey. He believed that confronting this solitude was essential for personal growth and authenticity. For Kierkegaard, the individual must face the truth of their aloneness to live a meaningful and authentic life. In this sense, existential loneliness is not just a burden, it is also a call to engage with oneself deeply and honestly. Friedrich Nietzsche explored a similar idea through his concept of the Übermensch, or Overman. He saw the journey towards self-realization as inherently solitary, requiring individuals to transcend societal norms and find their own values. For Nietzsche, existential loneliness was a necessary part of this process. It was not something to be avoided, but embraced as a source of strength and individuality. The loneliness of standing apart from the crowd, of forging one's own path, was central to his vision of a fulfilled life. Existential loneliness is also tied to our awareness of mortality. As conscious beings, we understand that our lives are finite and no one else can share the experience of our death. This knowledge creates a profound sense of solitude as we realize that we alone must face the uncertainty of what lies beyond. For Martin Heidegger, this awareness of mortality was central to the human condition. He described the concept of being toward death, emphasizing that the inevitability of death shapes how we live and how we confront our own existence. Existential loneliness in this context is inescapable. It is woven into our awareness of life's fragility. At the same time, existential loneliness can be a source of creativity and insight. Writers, artists, and thinkers have often drawn on their experiences of isolation to create works that resonate deeply with others. Franz Kafka's writings, for instance, reflect a profound sense of alienation and solitude, yet they speak to universal feelings of disconnection. This paradox highlights one of the unique aspects of existential loneliness. While it is deeply personal, it is also a shared human experience. In acknowledging our isolation, we find a strange form of connection with others who feel the same. Existential loneliness also raises questions about the nature of relationships. Can we ever truly know another person, or are our connections ultimately limited by the boundaries of our own subjectivity? Jean-Paul Sartre explored this tension in his existential philosophy, particularly in his play No Exit. He argued that while we crave connection, we often misunderstand or objectify others in our attempts to bridge the gap between ourselves and them. For Sartre, the struggle to connect authentically is an inevitable part of the human condition, yet existential loneliness is not necessarily something to overcome or fix. Many existentialists see it as an opportunity to confront the deeper truths of life. By acknowledging our aloneness, we are forced to grapple with questions of meaning, purpose, and identity on our own terms. This can be a source of anxiety, but it can also lead to profound self-discovery and growth. In this way, existential loneliness is both a challenge and a gift. It pushes us to seek understanding and authenticity in a world that often feels disconnected. Modern psychology has also explored the impact of existential loneliness on mental health and well-being. Some researchers argue that acknowledging and accepting this form of loneliness can be a pathway to resilience and self-acceptance. By understanding that existential loneliness is a natural part of life, we can move away from feelings of inadequacy or despair and focus on building meaningful connections with others. These connections may not erase our loneliness, but they can provide comfort and a sense of shared humanity. Existential loneliness is a reminder of both the limits and the richness of human experience. It forces us to face the fact that no one else can live our lives for us, think our thoughts, or feel our feelings. But it also reminds us of the value of connection, empathy, and understanding. While we may never fully bridge the gap between ourselves and others, the attempt to do so is what makes relationships meaningful. In the end, existential loneliness is neither entirely good nor entirely bad. It is simply part of what it means to be human. It challenges us to look inward, to confront our fears and uncertainties, and to find our own paths in a complex and often confusing world. By embracing our aloneness, we can learn to live with greater authenticity and openness, finding meaning not in escaping loneliness, but in facing it with courage and compassion.